The Texas sun hung mercilessly in the cloudless sky, scorching the already parched earth below. Dust devils danced across the barren landscape, stirring up the fine, dry soil that hadn't felt rain in nearly 3 months. It was the summer of 1875, 7 years after the end of the Civil War, but the wounds of that terrible conflict still festered across the land, especially here in the border counties where loyalties had been torn asunder. Sarah Thornton squinted against the harsh glare, adjusting the worn shawl that protected her face from the relentless dust. At 21, her features still held the softness of youth, but her eyes reflected a weariness that belonged to someone far older. 4 days had passed since they'd had a proper meal, and their water supply had dwindled to half a canteen. She glanced back at her brothers trudging behind her. Daniel 10, his face set in determined concentration, and James 8, whose steps had grown increasingly unsteady throughout the morning. "How much farther, Sarah?" Daniel asked, his voice cracking from thirst. Sarah consulted the tattered map she'd been following, comparing the landmarks with her father's meticulous notes in the margins. Captain Robert Thornton had been nothing if not precise, a quality that had served him well as an officer in the Union Army, but had ultimately failed to protect him from the fever that had claimed both him and their mother 3 weeks earlier. "We should reach the creek by midday," she answered, trying to infuse her voice with a confidence she didn't feel. "And Twin Oaks Plantation grandfather's land should be just beyond that." The land of her mother's family, a place Sarah had never seen but had heard about throughout her childhood in whispered conversations. Clara Thornton, born Clara Martin, had been the daughter of a prominent Texas landowner who had disowned her for marrying a Northerner. Now, with her parents gone and nowhere else to turn, Sarah was leading her brothers to the only place that might offer them shelter, the ancestral home her mother had been forbidden to return to. James stumbled, and Sarah quickly moved to steady him, her heart clenching at the hollowness of his cheeks and the dark circles beneath his eyes. "Just a little farther, sweetheart," she murmured, pressing the canteen to his lips. "Small sips, remember." The boy nodded weakly, taking the precious water obediently. Sarah allowed him just enough to wet his parched lips before securing the canteen back in her satchel. Alongside the water, she carried their few remaining possessions: her father's silver compass, her mother's handkerchief embroidered with Texas bluebonnets, and the legal papers that might, if fortune finally smiled upon them, secure their future. They continued their arduous journey, the horizon shimmering with heat. Sarah's thoughts drifted to the many families like theirs torn apart by the war and its aftermath. Her parents' marriage had been an act of defiance against the bitter divisions of their time, a Union officer and the daughter of a Southern plantation owner finding love amid hatred. For a while, on their small farm in Missouri, they had created their own peaceful world. But the fever had destroyed that fragile sanctuary, leaving Sarah to shoulder responsibilities far beyond her years. The distant crack of gunfire jolted her from her reverie. Sarah froze instinctively, pushing her brothers behind her. The sounds grew louder, not just gunshots now, but the thunderous drumming of hooves against the hard-packed earth. "What is it?" Daniel asked, his young face suddenly alert with fear. Before Sarah could answer, they appeared over the ridge ahead, a herd of wild horses, perhaps 20 strong, galloping at full speed directly toward them. Behind the horses rode a lone figure, trying to direct the herd's movement with occasional shots fired into the air. "Off the trail!" Sarah shouted, grabbing James's arm and pulling him toward a cluster of scrub oak trees. "Daniel, quickly!" Daniel reacted instantly, scrambling toward the meager shelter. But James, weakened by hunger and startled by the commotion, stumbled and fell to his knees in the middle of the trail. "James!" Sarah screamed, lunging back toward her brother as the thundering herd drew nearer. Time seemed to slow as a magnificent black stallion at the head of the herd bore down on the small boy. Sarah reached desperately for her brother, knowing she wouldn't make it in time. In that terrible moment, she saw the rider change course, spurring his horse forward with remarkable speed. He leaned low in the saddle, extending his arm as he rode alongside the stallion. In one fluid motion, the stranger swept James from the ground, pulling the boy safely into his saddle, mere seconds before the wild horses thundered past their hooves, kicking up clouds of dust that momentarily obscured Sarah's vision. When the air cleared, she saw the rider circling back, James clutched securely against his chest. Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by wariness as the stranger approached. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular build honed by years of hard work. His face, partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, bore the weathered lines of a man who had spent his life under the Texas sun. But it was his eyes that caught Sarah's attention, a striking gray like morning mist, observant and alert, yet somehow distant, as though part of him remained locked away. "Your boy all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice deep and measured, carrying the distinctive drawl of a native Texan. "My brother," Sarah corrected, automatically rushing forward to take James from his arms. "James, are you hurt?" The boy shook his head, though his small frame trembled with the aftermath of fear. "Thank you," Sarah said, looking up at the stranger. "If you hadn't been there—" "No need for thanks," he interrupted, dismounting with practiced ease. Up close, Sarah could see he was older than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his early 30s. A long scar ran along his jawline, partially hidden by several days' worth of stubble. "Name's Noah Sullivan. Those are my horses you nearly had a run-in with, or they will be, once I get them back to Whisper Creek Ranch." He glanced over the three of them, his keen eyes taking in their dusty, travel-worn appearance, the thinness of the boys, and the protective stance Sarah maintained even as she thanked him. "You folks look like you've been on the trail a while," he observed. "Where are you headed?" Sarah hesitated, years of her father's cautionary words echoing in her mind. Trust came at a steep price in these divided times, especially for the children of a Union officer traveling through former Confederate territory. "We're looking for family land," she finally answered, deliberately vague. "Near Lancaster County." Noah's expression revealed nothing, but something flickered in those storm-gray eyes. "That's still a fair piece from here," he said, "and you don't look equipped for the journey." His gaze settled on James, noting the boy's pallor and unsteady stance. "When's the last time you all had a proper meal?" Again, Sarah hesitated. Pride warred with practicality as she considered their dire circumstances. "We've managed," she said stiffly. Noah studied her for a moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "My ranch is about 3 miles east," he said, gesturing toward a distant line of trees. "You're welcome to rest there, get some food and water before continuing your journey." "That's very kind, but we couldn't impose," Sarah began. James swayed suddenly against her, his small body going limp. Sarah caught him, alarm flooding her features as she lowered him gently to the ground. "James, James, open your eyes," she pleaded, patting his cheek. Noah knelt beside them, pressing 2 fingers to the boy's neck. "He's dehydrated," he said, his tone shifting from casual to concerned. "Needs water and shade soon." He looked up at Sarah, his expression serious. "Ma'am, I don't mean to overstep, but your brother needs help and my ranch is the nearest shelter for miles. I'm offering assistance, nothing more." Sarah met his gaze, searching for any sign of deception or threat. Instead, she found only straightforward concern. With James unconscious and Daniel clearly exhausted, she had little choice. "All right," she conceded, her voice tight with worry. "We accept your help, Mr. Sullivan." Noah nodded, lifting James's small form effortlessly. "I'll take the boy with me," he said, mounting his horse with the child cradled securely in one arm. "Can you and your other brother manage the walk? It's not far, but in this heat—" "We'll manage," Sarah replied firmly, taking Daniel's hand. The boy looked up at her with questions in his eyes, but remained silent, understanding the gravity of their situation. Noah settled James before him in the saddle, keeping one arm around the boy's limp form. "Follow the tree line east," he instructed. "You'll see the windmill first, then the ranch house. I'll have water waiting." With that, he spurred his horse forward, careful not to jostle his small passenger. Sarah watched them go, fighting down the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. They were putting their trust in a stranger, something her father had warned against countless times. But what choice did they have? "Is James going to be all right?" Daniel asked, his young voice steady, despite the fear in his eyes. Sarah squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Yes, we all will be." She straightened her shoulders, adjusting her satchel. "Come on, let's not fall behind." They set off toward the distant tree line, the relentless sun beating down upon them. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the horizon where Noah Sullivan and her brother had disappeared. Behind the careful mask she maintained for Daniel's sake, her mind raced with questions and uncertainties. Who exactly was Noah Sullivan? Could he be trusted? And what would happen when he inevitably discovered who they really were? The children of a Union officer seeking claim to a southern plantation. Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her satchel, where her father's compass and the land deeds remained hidden. Whatever awaited them at Whisper Creek Ranch, she would face it with the same determination that had carried them this far. For her brother's sake, she had no other choice. True to Noah's word, the windmill appeared on the horizon after about an hour's walk, its metal blades catching the sunlight as they turned slowly in the hot breeze. Beyond it, Whisper Creek Ranch gradually came into view, a sprawling property centered around a two-story wooden house with a wide porch wrapping around its front. Several outbuildings dotted the landscape, a large barn, stables, a smokehouse, and what appeared to be bunkhouses for ranch hands. As they approached, Sarah noted signs of both care and struggle. The main house was well maintained, its white paint relatively fresh, but one of the corrals showed recent damage, and a nearby field bore the charred evidence of a fire. Most telling was the half-constructed barn at the edge of the property, work clearly abandoned midway due to lack of funds or manpower. A tall woman emerged onto the porch as they neared, shading her eyes against the sun. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore a practical cotton dress covered by a work apron. Even from a distance, Sarah could feel the woman's assessing gaze. "That'll be Martha Sullivan," Daniel murmured, surprising Sarah with his observation. "Noah's aunt, I'd guess. She looks like she runs things." Sarah glanced at her brother with newfound respect. Even exhausted and hungry, Daniel missed little. It was a quality he'd inherited from their father, that sharp attention to detail that saw beneath surfaces. "You're likely right," she replied quietly. "Remember what I told you. We're simply travelers passing through looking for distant family. Nothing more." Daniel nodded solemnly, understanding the need for caution. As they reached the yard, the front door opened again, and Noah emerged, nodding briefly to the woman Martha, presumably before striding to meet them. "Your brother's resting inside," he said without preamble. "Martha's given him water and some broth. He's weak, but he'll recover with proper care." Relief washed over Sarah. "Thank you. May I see him?" Noah nodded, gesturing toward the house. "This way. Martha's preparing food for you both as well." The interior of the ranch house was cooler than Sarah expected, the thick walls keeping out the worst of the summer heat. They followed Noah through a spacious main room furnished with well-worn but quality pieces, evidence of former prosperity carefully maintained through leaner times. In a small bedroom off the main hallway, James lay on a bed that dwarfed his thin frame. His face was still pale, but his breathing was steady, and someone had bathed the dust from his face and hands. Sarah rushed to his side, taking his small hand in hers. "James, it's Sarah. Can you hear me?" The boy's eyelids fluttered open, and a weak smile touched his lips. "Sarah," he whispered. "I'm sorry I fell." "Shh, don't apologize," she soothed, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "You're safe now. We all are." Martha Sullivan entered the room carrying a tray with 2 bowls of stew and thick slices of bread. The aroma made Sarah's stomach clench painfully, reminding her how long it had been since they'd eaten properly. "The boy needs rest more than anything," Martha said, her voice brusque but not unkind. "But he should take more broth when he wakes again." She set the tray on a small table. "You two need to eat. Slowly, mind you. Your stomachs won't take kindly to being filled too quickly after going empty." Sarah nodded, helping Daniel settle at the table before taking her own seat. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. Your kindness is—" "Miss," the older woman corrected. "Never married. And save your thanks until you're properly fed." Despite her gruff manner, there was a gentleness in how she arranged the napkins and made sure the water glasses were within easy reach. Noah remained in the doorway, watching the scene with those observant gray eyes. There was something in his stance, a slight favoring of his right side, a careful way he positioned his left arm that caught Sarah's attention. But before she could consider it further, Martha addressed him. "Those horses secure nephew—" "For now," Noah replied. "Lost 3 to the South Canyon, but we'll round them up tomorrow." His gaze moved to Sarah. "Once you've eaten and rested, we should talk about your plans." Sarah nodded, though anxiety fluttered in her chest. "Of course." When Noah and Martha had left them to eat, Daniel leaned closer to Sarah. "Did you notice his arm?" he whispered. Sarah nodded slightly. "Something's not right with it. War injury, perhaps." Daniel took a careful spoonful of stew. "Do you think we can trust them?" Sarah considered the question as she broke off a small piece of bread. The food was simple but well-prepared hearty beef stew, with vegetables from what must be a kitchen garden. "For now," she answered softly, "we need rest and supplies before we can continue to Twin Oaks. But remember, Daniel, we must be careful what we reveal. Former Confederate territory isn't kind to the children of Union officers." Daniel nodded solemnly, his young face serious beyond his years. "I won't forget Sarah." They ate in silence after that, savoring each bite of the first real meal they'd had in days. Through the window, Sarah could see the windmill turning against the vast Texas sky, and beyond it, the distant shimmer of what might be water. Despite her caution, she couldn't help feeling a small measure of relief. They had shelter food, and James was receiving care. For the moment, at least, they were safe. But as her gaze drifted to where their satchel rested against the wall, containing the papers that proved their claim to Twin Oaks Plantation, Sarah knew their respite would be brief. Once rested and supplied, they would need to continue their journey and face whatever awaited them at her grandfather's abandoned property. What she couldn't possibly know was how completely their lives would intertwine with Whisper Creek Ranch and its enigmatic owner, Noah Sullivan, a man with secrets of his own and a past as complex as hers. Sarah awoke to the unfamiliar comfort of a real bed, momentarily disoriented until memory flooded back. Whisper Creek Ranch. Noah Sullivan. James's collapse. She sat up quickly, relieved to see her youngest brother sleeping peacefully in the bed beside hers, his breathing deep and even. Daniel was already awake, sitting by the window with a book open on his lap. "Where did you get that?" Sarah asked softly, not wanting to wake James. Daniel held up the book, a well-worn copy of 2 Years Before the Mast. Miss Martha gave it to me, said it belonged to Lucas, but he doesn't read much. Lucas, Noah's cousin. He's 16 and helps with the horses. Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. He doesn't seem to like us much. Kept watching me like I might steal something. Sarah sighed, unsurprised. We're strangers, Daniel, and these are difficult times. She glanced out the window, noting the position of the sun. How long did I sleep? Almost until noon, came a voice from the doorway. Sarah turned to find Martha Sullivan standing there, a basket of clean linens in her arms. The older woman's piercing blue eyes, partially hidden behind wire-rimmed spectacles, assessed Sarah carefully. Your brothers said you've been pushing yourself too hard. Martha continued, entering the room to place fresh towels on the dresser. From the look of you, I'd say they were right. Sarah straightened, self-conscious of her rumpled appearance. We've been traveling for some time, Miss Sullivan. It's been challenging. Martha's expression softened slightly. I imagine so. 3 young ones alone on the trail is no small thing. She nodded toward James. The little one's fever broke during the night. He'll be weak for a day or two, but children bounce back quick. Thank you for caring for him, Sarah said, truly grateful. For all of us. Martha waved away the thanks. There's fresh water in the basin if you want to wash up. I've laid out some clean clothes that might fit you. Belonged to my niece before she married and moved east. Sarah hesitated. That's very generous, but nothing, Martha interrupted firmly. Can't have you meeting the rest of the ranch hands looking like you've been dragged behind a horse. There's appearances to maintain. Her tone brooked no argument. When you're ready, come to the kitchen. Noah wants to speak with you. After Martha left, Sarah moved to the basin and splashed cool water on her face, the simple luxury of cleanliness almost overwhelming after days on the dusty trail. The clothes Martha had provided were simple, but well-made, a blue cotton dress that was only slightly large on Sarah's frame, worn but clean. As she dressed, Sarah considered what lay ahead. They needed to rest, replenish their supplies, and then continue to Twin Oaks. The legal papers in her satchel were their only hope for a future proof that her mother, though disowned, remained the rightful heir to her father's property. If the land could still be claimed, it would provide a home for them, perhaps even income from whatever remained of the once prosperous cotton plantation. Sarah, Daniel said, interrupting her thoughts. What are we going to tell Mr. Sullivan about where we're going? Sarah secured the last button on her borrowed dress. As little as possible for now. We're looking for family land near Lancaster. That's true enough without revealing too much. Daniel nodded, though he looked troubled. He saved James. Doesn't seem right to lie to him. We're not lying, Sarah corrected gently. Just being cautious. Remember what Papa always said? In times of division, discretion is wisdom, Daniel finished quoting their father. I remember. Sarah smiled, ruffling his hair affectionately. Watch over James. I'll be back soon. The kitchen was a large, airy room at the back of the house, dominated by a substantial wooden table where Martha kneaded dough with practiced movements. Through the window, Sarah could see a vegetable garden thriving, despite the drought, thanks to what appeared to be an ingenious irrigation system channeling water from a nearby well. There you are, Martha said, glancing up. Noah's in his study. Down the hall, last door on the left. There's coffee if you want it. Sarah thanked her and made her way to the study, pausing briefly to compose herself before knocking. Come in, Noah's deep voice called. The study was smaller than Sarah expected, its walls lined with bookshelves. Noah sat behind a desk covered with ledgers and papers, the evidence of a working ranch's constant demands. He looked up as she entered, and Sarah was struck again by those unusual gray eyes, observant, intelligent, but guarded. "Miss Thornton," he greeted her, gesturing to a chair opposite his desk. "Please sit. You're looking better after some rest." "Thank you," Sarah said, taking the offered seat. "I can't express enough gratitude for your help yesterday. James is already improving." Noah nodded, leaning back slightly in his chair. There it was, again, that careful way he held his left arm almost imperceptibly stiff compared to his right. "I'm glad to hear it." He studied her for a moment. "Now, perhaps you can tell me what brings a young woman and two boys to one of the most drought-stricken parts of Texas, traveling alone?" Sarah had prepared for this question. "As I mentioned, we're seeking family land near Lancaster. Our parents recently passed fever, took them both within days of each other. We had a small farm in Missouri, but—" She let the sentence trail off, the implication clear. "I'm sorry for your loss," Noah said, and seemed to mean it. "But Lancaster's still a fair distance from here, and travel's dangerous these days. Outlaws, deserters, not to mention the drought." "We have no choice," Sarah replied simply. "The land is our only hope for a future." Noah's gaze was steady, assessing. "This land, you're certain it's still there? A lot has changed since the war. Properties abandoned, claimed by banks, taxes unpaid." "We have the necessary papers," Sarah said, perhaps too quickly. "Legal documents that prove ownership." Something flickered in Noah's expression, a brief shadow of what to concern suspicion. It was gone too quickly for Sarah to be certain. "I see." He closed the ledger before him. "Well, your brother needs time to recover his strength. You're welcome to stay until he's well enough to travel." Relief washed through Sarah. "That's very generous, Mr. Sullivan." "Noah," he corrected. "And it's not generosity so much as common decency. Can't send a sick child back onto the trail." He hesitated, then added, "However, Whisper Creek isn't a charity. Everyone who stays here contributes." Vera straightened in her chair. "Of course. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Noah. I can cook, clean, mend, whatever's needed." A hint of approval showed in his expression. Martha could use help with the household and garden. The droughts made extra work for everyone. He glanced toward the window. "And your brothers? Daniel's good with figures. James, when he's recovered, is surprisingly good with animals." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "Old Ben, my foreman, could use help with the accounts. And we've always got horses that need tending." He fixed her with that penetrating gaze again. "1 month. Give your brother time to recover his strength, earn enough supplies for your journey, and then you can continue to Lancaster." Sarah knew this was more than fair, generous even. Still, she couldn't help asking, "And what about payment? We'll need funds for the journey." "Room and board plus a small wage," Noah offered. "Fair compensation for fair work." It was a reasonable arrangement, better than Sarah had dared hope for. Yet something held her back from accepting immediately. Perhaps it was the way Noah looked at her, as though he was trying to see past her carefully constructed explanations. Or perhaps it was the risk of staying in one place too long, allowing others to learn too much about their past. But what choice did they have? James needed time to recover, and they desperately needed supplies and funds to continue their journey. "We accept," she said finally. "And thank you." Noah rose from his desk, and Sarah noticed again how he favored his right side. "I'll introduce you to the others at dinner. For now, Martha can show you what needs doing." As Sarah turned to leave, Noah added, "One condition, Miss Thornton." She paused, tensing slightly. "Yes?" His expression was unreadable. "Whatever brought you here, whatever troubles you're running from or toward, keep them to yourself. Whisper Creek has seen enough conflict. I won't have more brought to my door." The warning was clear, and Sarah felt a chill despite the warm room. What did he suspect? How much had he guessed? "I understand," she said quietly. Noah held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded, dismissing her with a gesture. As Sarah left the study, she couldn't shake the feeling that Noah Sullivan knew more than he was saying about her, about Twin Oaks, about the land that might be her only chance at a future for her brothers. What she didn't realize was that she had already stepped into a complex web of history-land disputes and lingering Civil War divisions that would soon force her to confront truths about her family and Noah's that had been buried for years. Dinner at Whisper Creek Ranch was a simple but substantial affair served at the long kitchen table, rather than in the more formal dining room. Sarah sat between her brothers, acutely aware of the curious glances from the assembled ranch hands and household staff. Martha had introduced them briefly before the meal, old Ben Parker, the elderly foreman, whose sharp eyes belied his 70 years. Lucas Sullivan, Noah's 16-year-old cousin, whose sullen demeanor made his distrust clear, and 3 ranch hands whose names Sarah struggled to remember amid the flurry of introductions. Noah sat at the head of the table, quietly authoritative. He'd changed from his work clothes into a clean shirt, though he still wore the practical attire of a working rancher rather than a gentleman farmer. The conversation flowed around them, talk of cattle water levels, fence repairs, the mundane but vital concerns of ranch life. "So, Miss Thornton," old Ben said during a lull in the conversation, his deep voice carrying the distinctive cadence of a man born into slavery but long since free. "Noah tells us you folks are headed to Lancaster County." Sarah nodded carefully, cutting a piece of roast beef for James. "Yes, we have family land there." "Martin land, is it?" Ben asked casually. Sarah's fork froze halfway to her plate. How could he possibly know? She glanced at Noah, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. "What makes you think that?" she asked, striving to keep her voice steady. Ben's weathered face creased in a smile. "No offense meant, miss. Just that there ain't many old family properties left unclaimed in Lancaster. The Martins had the biggest spread Twin Oaks plantation. Beautiful place in its day." His eyes grew distant with memory. "Worked neighboring land as a boy. Old Joseph Martin grew the finest cotton in 3 counties before the war changed everything." Sarah felt Daniel tense beside her. James, too young to understand the implications, continued eating, oblivious to the sudden undercurrent of tension. "You seem to know the area well," Sarah said carefully. Ben nodded. "Texas born and raised. Seen it through slavery war and whatever this troubled peace is we're living in now." His keen eyes studied her. "Martin land's been abandoned since the war. Bank's been threatening to auction it for back taxes, last I heard." This was news Sarah hadn't expected, and troubling news at that. If the land was to be auctioned, their claim might be in jeopardy, no matter what legal papers they possessed. "When?" she asked, unable to hide her concern. "When is this auction to take place?" "Sarah," Daniel murmured in warning, but it was too late. Ben glanced at Noah before answering. "Can't rightly say. These things get delayed, especially with the drought making land less valuable." He tilted his head, curiosity evident. "You have some connection to the Martins, miss?" Before Sarah could formulate a response, Lucas spoke up, his young voice hard with suspicion. "What's it matter? They're probably just fortune hunters looking to grab abandoned property." He directed a cold stare at Sarah. "Plenty of Northerners coming down here after the war, thinking they can just take whatever they want." "Lucas," Noah said sharply, "that's enough." The rebuke silenced the boy, but his hostile gaze remained fixed on Sarah. The uncomfortable moment stretched until Martha intervened. "Who wants apple cobbler made it fresh this morning?" The tension broke as plates were cleared for dessert, but Sarah could feel Noah's eyes on her throughout the remainder of the meal. She had revealed too much, allowed her concern about the auction to override her caution. Later, after helping Martha with the dishes and settling her brothers for the night, Sarah stepped onto the back porch, seeking a moment of solitude to collect her thoughts. The night air was cooler, a blessed relief after the day's heat. Stars crowded the vast Texas sky more than she had ever seen in Missouri. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Sarah started at Noah's voice. He stood at the far end of the porch, a solitary figure, gazing out at the darkness. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said, turning to go back inside. "You're not," he replied. "It's a big porch." Something in his tone made her pause. She moved closer, maintaining a proper distance, but close enough for conversation. "Your ranch is lovely," she offered. "You've built something special here." A shadow of a smile touched his lips. "I didn't build it. My grandfather did, and my father expanded it. I'm just trying to keep it from falling apart in the worst drought in 30 years. There was no self-pity in his statement, just a matter-of-fact acknowledgement of his struggle. Sarah found herself admiring his resilience. "Ben seems to know a lot about this region," she said, testing the waters. Noah's gaze remained on the distant horizon. "Ben knows every acre within 50 miles, and the history of who owned it going back 3 generations. He turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim light from the kitchen windows, including Twin Oaks Plantation. Sarah's breath caught. There was no point in further deception. Noah had clearly made the connection. "It belonged to my grandfather," she admitted quietly. "Joseph Martin was my mother's father." Noah nodded, unsurprised. "Clara Martin. I remember hearing about her. She married a Northerner before the war caused quite the scandal." His penetrating gaze studied her. "Which makes you the daughter of a Union officer." It wasn't a question. Sarah tensed, ready for the hostility such a revelation usually provoked in former Confederate territory. "My father was Captain Robert Thornton," she confirmed, chin lifting slightly in defiance. "A good man who fought for what he believed in, as I'm sure many on both sides did." Noah was silent for a long moment. "The war's been over 7 years, Miss Thornton. Too many died for us to keep fighting its battles." The lack of animosity in his voice surprised her. "Not everyone shares that view." "No," he agreed. "They don't." His gaze drifted to the darkened landscape. "But holding on to hatred is a luxury I can't afford. I've got a ranch to run people who depend on me." Sarah studied his profile, noting again the careful way he held his left arm. A war injury seemed increasingly likely, which raised the question of which side he had fought for. "You served," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Noah's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Confederate cavalry. Ended as a captain like your father." He turned to face her fully. "Does that change things for you?" It was a fair question. 7 years after Appomattox, the wounds of war remained raw for many. Families divided, friendships, destroyed communities torn apart by conflicting loyalties. "No," Sarah answered honestly. "It doesn't. The war took too much from too many. My parents taught us that bitterness only extends its reach." Something in Noah's expression eased slightly. "Wise people, your parents." He paused, then added, "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Sarah gazed out at the dark silhouette of the windmill against the starlit sky. "What happens now? Will you ask us to leave because of who my father was?" Noah shook his head. "As I said, the war's over. Your arrangements remain the same: work for a month, earn supplies and wages, then continue your journey." He hesitated, then added, "But I would advise discretion regarding your father's service." Lucas lost his parents during the war, his father at Gettysburg, his mother to grief shortly after. The wounds are still fresh for him. Sarah nodded her understanding. "And Twin Oaks. What can you tell me about its current state?" A shadow crossed Noah's face. "It's been abandoned since your grandfather died in '67. The house is still standing from what I hear, but the fields have gone fallow." He turned to face her directly. "Miss Thornton, I should warn you, Twin Oaks borders my eastern property line. There's been complications regarding water rights since the war. The creek that serves as the boundary has been a source of dispute." "Between you and whom?" Sarah asked, puzzled. "If the plantation has been abandoned, Victor Harrington," Noah interrupted, his voice hardening, "owns the bank in Lancaster, has been trying to claim Twin Oaks for years. Says your grandfather owed debts that were never settled." Alarm coursed through Sarah. "That can't be right. I have the deed signed over to my mother before she left. Grandfather may have disowned her, but he never changed his will." Noah's expression grew grave. "Wills can be contested, especially when there's valuable land at stake. And Harrington has powerful friends." "Are you warning me away from my own inheritance, Mr. Sullivan?" Sarah asked, a hint of steel entering her voice. "I'm warning you that claiming it won't be as simple as presenting a deed," he replied evenly. "These are complicated times, Miss Thornton. Land, water rights, old grudges. They're all tangled together in ways that can be dangerous." The implied threat was clear, yet Noah himself didn't seem to be issuing it. Rather, he appeared to be cautioning her about the realities she would face. "I have no choice," Sarah said simply. "That land is all we have left." Noah studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Then I suggest you use your time here wisely. Learn what you can about Twin Oaks, the legal situation, who might stand with you or against you in Lancaster." He straightened, wincing slightly as he moved his left arm. "Knowledge is protection, Miss Thornton." With that, he nodded a brief goodnight and moved toward the door, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and the vast Texas night. As she gazed out at the shadowy landscape, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped into something far more complex than a simple land claim. The connection between Whisper Creek Ranch and Twin Oaks, the mysterious Victor Harrington Noah's warning, all suggested complications she hadn't anticipated. But one thing remained clear: Twin Oaks represented the only future possible for her and her brothers. Whatever obstacles stood in their path, she would face them with the same determination that had carried them across hundreds of miles of hostile territory. What Sarah couldn't know as she finally turned to go inside was how completely her fate was already intertwined with Noah Sullivan's, and how the secrets of both their families would soon collide in ways neither could predict. Life at Whisper Creek Ranch quickly settled into a rhythm that was both exhausting and oddly comforting. Sarah rose before dawn each day to help Martha with breakfast, for the ranch hands worked in the garden during the morning heat, assisted with household tasks in the afternoon, and often mended by lamplight after dinner. The work was hard, but satisfying, a return to the purposeful routine they had lost with their parents' deaths. Daniel thrived under Old Ben's tutelage, revealing a natural aptitude for numbers that made him invaluable in managing the ranch accounts. James, once recovered, spent his days shadowing the stable master, his affinity for horses, earning grudging respect even from the most seasoned hands. A week passed, then two. The relentless Texas summer showed no signs of abating the drought, tightening its grip on the land. Each day, Noah and his men rode out to check water sources, move cattle to whatever grazing remained, and maintain the fragile balance that kept the ranch alive. Sarah saw little of Noah during daylight hours, their interactions limited to brief exchanges at mealtimes or the occasional moment on the porch in the evening. Yet she found herself increasingly aware of his presence, the sound of his voice issuing instructions to the hands, the glimpse of his tall figure astride his horse, returning at dusk, the quiet authority he commanded without raising his voice. It was during the third week of their stay that Sarah finally discovered the truth about Noah's arm. She had risen earlier than usual, unable to sleep in the pre-dawn hours. Thinking to get a head start on the day's bread, she made her way quietly to the kitchen, only to freeze at the sound of voices from the small back room Martha used for treating minor injuries and ailments. "Getting worse, not better," Martha was saying, her normally gruff voice softened with concern. "You need to let me examine it properly." "It's fine," came Noah's reply, tight with what Sarah recognized as pain. "Just overworked it yesterday." "It's not fine," Martha insisted. "That Confederate surgeon did a butcher's job setting your shoulder. I told you years ago it would cause problems if you didn't let a proper doctor look at it." "And which doctor would that be?" Noah's voice held a bitter edge Sarah hadn't heard before. "The one in Lancaster who still calls me a traitor for surrendering. Or maybe the military surgeon who said amputation was the only option." Sarah should have withdrawn, given them privacy. But something held her in place. Perhaps the raw emotion in Noah's voice, so different from his usual controlled demeanor. "You're the most stubborn man I've ever known, Noah Sullivan." Martha sighed. "At least let me prepare a poultice for the inflammation. And you'll wear the sling tonight, no arguments." "Fine," Noah conceded, though he sounded anything but pleased. "But no one needs to know about this. The hands respect strength, not weakness." "It's not weakness to heal," Martha replied softly. "You didn't think less of your men when they were wounded." A long silence followed, broken only by the sound of Martha moving around, presumably preparing the poultice. Sarah was about to retreat when Noah spoke again, his voice so low she almost missed it. "I see their faces sometimes, Martha. The men under my command who didn't come home. Boys, some of them. Barely old enough to shave, let alone die." "The war's been over 7 years, Noah," Martha said gently. "Has it?" Noah's question hung in the air. "Feels like we're still fighting it, just without uniforms. North against south, neighbor against neighbor. Land and water instead of slavery and states' rights. Is that why you're helping the Thornton girl? Some kind of penance?" Sarah held her breath, waiting for Noah's answer. "I'm helping them because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. "Her father being Union doesn't change that." "And the fact that they're headed to Twin Oaks," Martha pressed. "Land that borders yours with water rights you've been fighting Harrington over for years." Another pause longer this time. "They have a legal claim from what she's said. Better them than Harrington." "Be careful, Noah," Martha warned. "That girl's desperate to secure a future for her brothers. People do unpredictable things when they're protecting family." "Don't I know it?" Noah murmured so quietly, Sarah barely caught the words. Realizing they might emerge at any moment, Sarah retreated silently to her room, her mind racing with what she'd overheard. Noah had been seriously wounded during the war, a shoulder injury that still plagued him. More importantly, there was clearly some ongoing conflict over the water rights between Whisper Creek and Twin Oaks, a dispute that involved the banker Harrington. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at her door. Daniel stood there already dressed for the day, his young face serious. "Ben wants to show me something in the account books," he said. "But I thought you should see this first." He held out a folded newspaper clipping yellowed with age. Sarah took it, unfolding it carefully to reveal a notice dated 1866. Notice of sale Twin Oaks Plantation. 500 acres to be sold at public auction to satisfy debts to Lancaster County Bank. Property includes main house outbuildings and water rights to eastern branch of Whisper Creek. Auction to be held September 10th, 1866. Sarah's heart raced. "Where did you find this?" "In one of the old ledgers," Daniel replied. "Ben's been teaching me to organize the ranch records. This was tucked into the accounts from '66. Sarah studied the notice, her mind working rapidly. "But the sale never happened, or we wouldn't have our deed." She looked up at her brother. "Did Ben say anything about this?" Daniel shook his head. "I didn't show it to him. Thought I should bring it to you first." Sarah squeezed his shoulder, proud of his discretion. "You did right, Daniel. Let's keep this between us for now." After Daniel left, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the yellowed paper. If an auction had been scheduled but never completed, what did that mean for their claim? And why had Noah kept this notice all these years? The pieces were beginning to form a troubling picture. Twin Oaks and Whisper Creek shared a water source, the creek itself. Water that in this drought-stricken region was more valuable than the land it nourished. Noah had been in conflict with Harrington over those water rights for years, and now Sarah and her brothers had arrived with a legal claim that could potentially upset the delicate balance of power. No wonder Noah had been cautious about their presence. No wonder Lucas regarded them with suspicion. They weren't just travelers passing through, they were potential threats to Whisper Creek's very survival. Sarah carefully refolded the notice and tucked it into her satchel alongside the deed to Twin Oaks. The simple journey she had envisioned, claiming their inheritance and starting anew, was becoming increasingly complicated. But one thing was certain: she needed to learn more about the relationship between the two properties, the mysterious Harrington, and exactly what kind of legal battle might await them in Lancaster. Knowledge was protection, as Noah had said, and Sarah intended to arm herself thoroughly before continuing their journey to Twin Oaks. The opportunity to learn more came sooner than Sarah expected. That afternoon, as she worked in the kitchen garden, pulling weeds from between rows of struggling vegetables, she became aware of a heated discussion near the corral. Noah and old Ben stood facing a well-dressed stranger whose polished appearance seemed utterly out of place in the dusty ranch yard. Curiosity piqued, Sarah moved to a section of the garden closer to the men, pretending to focus on the tomato plants while straining to hear their conversation. "Perfectly reasonable offer, Sullivan," the stranger was saying, his voice carrying a note of practiced persuasion. "More than fair, considering the drought." "The answer's still no, Harrington," Noah replied, his tone level but firm. "Whisper Creek isn't for sale. Not to you, not to anyone." Sarah nearly dropped her trowel. So this was Victor Harrington, the banker who had been trying to claim Twin Oaks, the man Noah had warned her about. She studied him surreptitiously, mid-40s, expensively dressed, despite the heat, with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Sentiment is a luxury, Sullivan," Harrington continued. "You're barely keeping this place afloat. The drought's only getting worse, and your loans come due in 2 months." "I'm aware of my obligations," Noah answered coldly. "And I'll meet them." Harrington shook his head, a false sympathy in his expression. "With what half your cattle are underweight from poor grazing, your crop fields are dust, and that pitiful stream you call a creek is drying up by the day." He gestured expansively. "Be reasonable. Take my offer, walk away with something instead of nothing." "This land has been in the Sullivan family for 3 generations, Ben interjected, his normally calm voice edged with anger. "It's not just property to be bought and sold." Harrington's gaze flicked dismissively over the elderly foreman. "Times change, old man. Sentimentality didn't save the Confederacy, and it won't save this ranch. He turned back to Noah. Think about it, Sullivan. My offer stands until the end of the month. After that, he shrugged eloquently. As Harrington moved to leave, his gaze swept the yard and briefly met Sarah's. Something in his expression changed, a flicker of interest quickly masked. With a tip of his hat in her direction, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Noah watched him go, his face set in hard lines. Only when Harrington had disappeared from view did he turn to Ben. "Check the north pasture fence," he said, his voice controlled despite the tension evident in his stance. "I don't trust him not to have men interfering with our boundaries." Ben nodded and moved off, leaving Noah alone. For a moment, he remained motionless, staring after Harrington's retreating figure. Then, with a barely perceptible sigh, he turned and caught sight of Sarah in the garden. Their eyes met across the yard. Sarah straightened, abandoning any pretense of not having overheard. After a moment's hesitation, Noah crossed to the garden fence. "I suppose you heard all that?" he said without preamble. Sarah nodded. "Is that the Harrington you warned me about? The one interested in Twin Oaks?" "The same." Noah's gray eyes were stormy with suppressed anger. "He's been trying to piece together all the land in this part of the county. Says he's representing Eastern investors planning a railroad spur." "Do you believe him?" "I believe he's a vulture circling dying ranches," Noah replied bluntly. "The droughts pushed many to the edge of ruin. Harrington offers cash to desperate people, buys at a fraction of true value, then sits on the land waiting for rain and railroads to multiply his investment." Sarah processed this information, connecting it to what she'd overheard that morning. "He mentioned loans coming due." A muscle tightened in Noah's jaw. "Ranching's not profitable in a drought. I've had to borrow to keep Whisper Creek going." His eyes met hers directly. "But that's my concern, not yours." "It becomes my concern if Harrington is also after Twin Oaks," Sarah pointed out. "Why does he want both properties?" Noah hesitated, then gestured for her to follow him. They walked in silence to the eastern edge of the ranch property, where a small rise overlooked a meandering line of trees, marking the course of a stream little more than a trickle in the current drought. "Whisper Creek," Noah said, nodding toward the stream, "named for the sound it makes in spring when the water's high, or used to make before the drought." He pointed to where the stream curved eastward. "It forms the boundary between my land and Twin Oaks, but more importantly, it's the only reliable water source for miles." Sarah studied the landscape, understanding dawning. "So whoever controls the creek controls survival," Noah finished grimly. "There's a natural spring that feeds it on Twin Oaks land, never runs dry even in the worst drought. My grandfather and Joseph Martin, your grandfather, had an agreement about water rights. But after Martin died and Twin Oaks was abandoned, that agreement became complicated. And Harrington wants to control the water," Sarah concluded, "to force sales from desperate ranchers." Noah nodded, a hint of approval in his expression at her quick understanding. "Water is power in Texas, Miss Thornton. Always has been, always will be." Sarah turned to face him directly. "Then why are you helping us? If I reclaim Twin Oaks, won't that threaten your water access?" It was the question that had been troubling her since overhearing Martha and Noah that morning. By helping them reach Twin Oaks and establish their claim, Noah might be endangering his own ranch. Noah's gaze returned to the distant creek, his expression unreadable. "Your grandfather was a fair man, honored agreements, kept his word." He glanced at her. "I'm gambling that his granddaughter inherited those qualities." The implied question hung between them. Would she honor the water-sharing agreement if she successfully claimed Twin Oaks? Or would she, desperate to secure her brother's future, use the water rights as leverage? "I don't know the details of any agreement," Sarah said carefully, "but I believe in fairness, Mr. Sullivan. Water is life for everyone, not just those lucky enough to have a spring on their property." Something in Noah's expression eased slightly. "Then perhaps we understand each other." He turned back toward the ranch buildings. "You should know Harrington won't give up Twin Oaks easily, especially now." "Now?" Sarah asked, puzzled. "Now that he knows you're here," Noah clarified. "Make no mistake, Miss Thornton. Harrington recognized you for what you are, a threat to his plans. And he's not a man who tolerates threats." A chill ran through Sarah despite the summer heat. "How could he know who I am? Lancaster's a small community. Word travels. And Harrington makes it his business to know everything happening in the county." Noah's expression grew grave. "Be careful what you say in town when you go, and who you say it to." With that warning, he left her standing on the rise, gazing out at the thin line of trees marking Whisper Creek, the boundary between her future and Noah Sullivan's present. As she watched his tall figure stride back toward the ranch buildings, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their fates were becoming increasingly entangled. The simple plan she had constructed, claim their inheritance, build a new life, was revealing itself to be far more complex than she had imagined. Water rights, bank loans, a greedy investor with unknown resources, these were challenges she hadn't prepared for. And beneath it all ran the current of her growing connection to Whisper Creek Ranch and its people. Martha's gruff kindness, old Ben's wisdom, even Lucas's grudging acceptance as the weeks passed. And Noah himself, complex, honorable, carrying wounds, both physical and emotional, from a war that still cast long shadows over all their lives. Sarah turned her gaze eastward, toward where Twin Oaks Plantation lay just beyond the horizon. Their future waited there, she was certain, but the path to claiming it had become far less clear. The following weeks brought subtle but significant changes to life at Whisper Creek Ranch. As July melted into August, the drought's grip tightened further. The creek shrank to little more than a damp line etched into the parched earth, and Noah and his men spent increasingly long days moving cattle to whatever patches of grazing remained. For Sarah, the daily rhythm of work continued, tending the struggling garden with Martha's guidance, helping prepare meals, mending clothes, worn thin from hard labor. But beneath the routine, a new awareness had taken root. Whisper Creek Ranch was in trouble. The signs were everywhere in the tightening of supplies, the careful rationing of flour and sugar, the worried conversations that fell silent when she entered a room. And then there was Noah himself. Though he maintained his stoic facade, Sarah had begun to recognize the subtle signs of strain, the deepening lines around his eyes, the late nights spent poring over account books by lamplight, the increasing stiffness in his wounded shoulder as he pushed himself beyond reasonable limits. It was during one such evening, as Sarah sat on the back porch mending one of James's shirts, that she became aware of Noah's presence. He stood at the far railing, gazing out at the starlit landscape, a solitary figure outlined against the night sky. "The stars seem brighter here than in Missouri," Sarah said quietly, breaking the silence. Noah turned slightly, acknowledging her presence. "Clearer air," he replied. "Less moisture. A mixed blessing, it seems." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Indeed." He moved closer, leaning against the porch post. "Your brother Daniel has quite a head for figures. Ben says he's reorganized our accounting system more efficiently than it's been in years." Pride warmed Sarah's heart. "He takes after our father that way. Papa always said Daniel could calculate faster than most men could think." And James has a way with the horses, especially that ornery Mustang no one could get near. He's always had a gift with animals, Sarah said, setting her mending aside. Our mother used to say he could charm the birds from the trees. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only with the night sounds of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Sarah found herself studying Noah's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the weariness etched into his features, the careful way he held his left arm. "How bad is it?" she asked finally. "The drought, the ranch's situation." Noah's gaze remained fixed on the distant horizon. For a moment, Sarah thought he might deflect the question or refuse to answer. Then he sighed, the sound carrying the weight of months of worry. "Bad," he admitted. "The creek's lower than I've ever seen it. If we don't get rain soon—" He left the sentence unfinished, but its implications hung heavy in the night air. "And the loans Harrington mentioned." Noah's shoulders tensed slightly. "Come due in 6 weeks. Without a decent water source to maintain the herd, I can't meet the payments." "Which is exactly what Harrington wants," Sarah concluded. "Force you to sell at a fraction of the ranch's worth." "That's his game," Noah agreed. "Has been since the war ended. Buy up land cheap, wait for conditions to improve, sell at a profit to northern investors." His voice hardened. "Men who never worked the land, never bled for it, making fortunes from others' misfortunes." The bitterness in his tone revealed more than perhaps he intended, the frustration of a proud man watching his legacy slip through his fingers despite his best efforts. "There must be something that can be done," Sarah said. Noah turned to face her, his expression softened by the dim light from the kitchen windows. "You sound like Lucas, always looking for a fight, a way to beat the odds." "Is that so terrible?" "No," he conceded. "Just unlikely to succeed. Harrington has money-influence friends in the territorial government. I have a drought-stricken ranch and debts." "And people who depend on you," Sarah added softly. "People who believe in you." Something flickered in Noah's gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at her insight or her implicit inclusion of herself among those who believed in him. "Why Twin Oaks?" he asked abruptly, changing the subject. "You could have gone anywhere after your parents died. Why risk so much to claim an abandoned plantation?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She'd grown so accustomed to guarding their plans that speaking openly felt almost dangerous. "It's our only option," she said finally. "What little money our parents had went to pay off the farm debts after they died. Twin Oaks is our only chance for a home, a future." She looked up at him directly. "You understand that, don't you? Fighting for your home against impossible odds." Noah held her gaze, something unspoken passing between them, a recognition of shared determination despite circumstances that would crush less resilient spirits. "I do," he acknowledged quietly. Before either could speak again, the peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of approaching horses riding hard from the east. Noah straightened instantly, his entire demeanor shifting from contemplative to alert. "Stay here," he ordered, moving swiftly toward the steps. But Sarah was already on her feet, following him into the yard, as 2 riders appeared in the moonlight, pushing their horses at a dangerous pace. She recognized Lucas's slight form immediately, but the second rider was unfamiliar, one of the hands who worked the eastern boundary. "Uncle Noah!" Lucas called out, his young voice tight with urgency. "Fire at the East Creek Bend!" Noah was already moving, shouting orders before the riders had fully stopped. "Bend fire at the boundary. All hands!" The ranch erupted into activity. Men rushing from the bunkhouse, Martha appearing at the door, with lanterns, voices calling back and forth as horses were quickly saddled. "How bad?" Noah demanded as Lucas dismounted. Started small but spreading fast with the wind, the boy reported, his face streaked with soot. Right at the creek bend where our land meets Twin Oaks. Noah's expression darkened. The spring, he said more to himself than to Lucas. Harrington's making his move. He turned to find Sarah still standing on the porch. Stay here, he repeated. Keep the boys inside. I can help, Sarah protested. I've fought fires before. But Noah was already striding toward the barn, issuing rapid instructions to the gathering men. Martha appeared at Sarah's side, pressing a lantern into her hands. If you want to help gather every bucket, pot, and pan from the kitchen, the older woman directed, and wet all the blankets you can find. Men fighting fire need wet cloth to breathe through. Sarah nodded, grateful for the clear instructions, and hurried to comply. Inside, she found Daniel already awake, James close behind him. What's happening? Daniel asked, his young face serious in the lamplight. Fire at the eastern boundary, Sarah explained, gathering buckets. Help me collect containers for water and wet as many blankets as you can. The boys moved quickly, following her instructions without question. As they worked, Sarah's mind raced. A fire at the creek bend, precisely where Noah had shown her the boundary between Whisper Creek and Twin Oaks, where the natural spring fed the creek. The timing, so soon after Harrington's visit, couldn't be coincidence. By the time they had assembled a wagon full of supplies, the night sky to the east glowed an ominous orange. Martha drove the wagon with Sarah and the boys balanced among the water barrels and wet blankets. As they approached the creek boundary, the scale of the emergency became clear. The fire had started small, as Lucas reported, but the drought-parched brush along the creek provided eager fuel. Men worked frantically in two lines, one digging a fire break to prevent the flames from spreading west toward the ranch buildings, the other passing buckets from the remaining pools in the creek to douse the most aggressive flames. Noah stood at the center of the activity, shouting directions, his tall figure silhouetted against the flames. Even from a distance, Sarah could see how he favored his right arm, the left held stiffly at his side as he worked. Martha pulled the wagon as close as safety allowed. "Blankets and water," she called out. Men broke from their work momentarily to grab the wet cloth, wrapping it around their faces before returning to the fight. "Daniel, James, stay with Martha," Sarah instructed, grabbing a shovel from the wagon. Before her brothers could protest, she had joined the line of men digging the fire break, throwing herself into the exhausting work. The heat was intense, the smoke acrid in her lungs, despite the wet cloth she had tied over her nose and mouth. Sweat soaked her clothes within minutes, and ash and soot covered her skin. But Sarah continued digging alongside the ranch hands, widening the bare earth barrier that might save Whisper Creek from the advancing flames. She was so focused on her task that she didn't notice Noah until he was beside her, his face blackened with soot, eyes red-rimmed from smoke. "What are you doing?" he demanded, shouting to be heard over the roar of the fire. "Helping," Sarah shouted back, driving her shovel into the hard earth again. For a moment, it seemed he might order her back to the wagon. Then, recognizing the determination in her stance, he simply nodded and returned to coordinating the firefighting efforts. For hours they battled the blaze, digging, dousing, beating back flames with wet blankets. The men worked with the practiced coordination of those who had faced fire before a common threat in the drought-stricken Texas landscape. It was past midnight when they finally gained the upper hand. The flames receded, beaten back by their combined efforts, and a merciful shift in the wind. Exhausted men slumped to the ground, faces streaked with sweat and ash lungs burning from smoke. Sarah found herself sitting on a fallen log near the creek bed, too tired to stand. Noah approached, offering a canteen of water. She accepted gratefully, the lukewarm liquid easing her parched throat. "You're a hell of a worker, Miss Thornton," he said, his voice rough from shouting and smoke. "Sarah," she corrected, too exhausted for formality. "After fighting a fire together, I think we can use first names." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Sarah, then." He sat beside her on the log, the weariness in his movements revealing the toll the night had taken. "You've done this before." It wasn't a question, but Sarah nodded anyway. "Prairie fires in Missouri, they move faster than you can imagine." Noah surveyed the smoldering landscape, his expression grim. This wasn't natural. "Harrington?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Almost certainly, though we'll never prove it." Noah ran a hand through his ash-streaked hair. "Fire started in 3 places simultaneously all along the creek. Nature doesn't work that way." "But why? What does he gain by burning the boundary?" Noah's gray eyes reflected the dying embers as he looked eastward toward Twin Oaks. "Control of the spring," he said simply. "The fire burned hottest, right where the spring feeds the creek. With the brush cleared, his men can divert the water more easily straight onto Twin Oaks land away from Whisper Creek." Sarah's exhausted mind processed this information slowly. "Without that water, Whisper Creek can't survive the drought," Noah finished. "And neither can the cattle I need to sell to pay off my loans." The calculated cruelty of the plan stunned Sarah. "That's monstrous." "That's business, according to men like Harrington." Noah's voice was flat, but the tension in his jaw revealed his anger. "Land water lives all just entries in a ledger." Sarah looked around at the exhausted men at Martha, tending to minor burns at her brothers, helping distribute what remained of the water. These people had fought through the night to save their home, their livelihood. And someone had deliberately set a fire that could have destroyed everything, all for profit. "What will you do?" she asked quietly. Noah's gaze remained on the dying fire. "What I've always done. Keep fighting, keep working, hope for rain." He turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "You should take the boys back to the house. Get some rest. And you, I'll stay with the men, make sure the fire's completely out." He stood wincing as he moved his left arm. "Dawn's only a few hours away." Sarah wanted to protest, to insist he rest as well, to point out that he was driving himself beyond reasonable limits. But the set of his jaw told her such concerns would be unwelcome. This was who Noah Sullivan was, a man who would work himself to exhaustion rather than fail those who depended on him. As she gathered her brothers and joined Martha for the ride back to the ranch house, Sarah found her thoughts in turmoil. The fire had been a deliberate attack, not just on Noah's property, but on the future she hoped to build at Twin Oaks. If Harrington could resort to arson to force Noah to sell, what might he do to prevent her from claiming her inheritance? More troubling still was the realization that her feelings for Noah Sullivan had become far more complicated than simple gratitude or respect. Watching him lead his men against the fire, seeing his determination despite exhaustion and pain, had stirred emotions she hadn't expected. Admiration, certainly, but something deeper as well, something that made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with the fire's heat. Such feelings were dangerous. In a few days, they would leave Whisper Creek for Twin Oaks. Their paths would diverge, their interests potentially conflict over the very water rights Harrington sought to control. Attachment to Noah Sullivan could only complicate an already precarious situation. Yet, as the wagon rattled back toward the ranch house under the fading stars, Sarah couldn't deny the truth that had been gradually taking shape over the past weeks. Whisper Creek had become more than a temporary shelter on their journey. It had become, against all odds, and her careful plans, something dangerously close to home. The aftermath of the fire brought new tensions to Whisper Creek Ranch. The damage, while contained before reaching the main buildings, had still been significant acres of grazing land, destroyed the creek's eastern bend. Compromised and, most critically, the natural spring partially blocked by debris and ash. Noah and his men worked from dawn to dusk, clearing the damage, reinforcing the creek banks, and trying to restore the spring's flow. But their efforts yielded limited success. The water level continued to drop, and with it, the ranch's chances of survival. Sarah threw herself into supporting these efforts, taking on additional household duties to free Martha for nursing the men who had sustained minor injuries in the firefight. She found herself watching for Noah's return each evening, worrying when he stayed out past dark relief washing over her, when his tall figure finally appeared in the yard. It was 4 days after the fire when the storm arrived, not the desperately needed rain, but a storm of a different kind. Sarah was in the garden harvesting the few vegetables that had survived the heat when the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Looking up, she saw 3 riders approaching from the direction of Lancaster, well-dressed men on expensive horses, led by the now familiar figure of Victor Harrington. Noah emerged from the barn to meet them, his stance wary, old Ben close behind him. Sarah set down her basket and moved closer, drawn by instinct and concern. "Sullivan," Harrington greeted, his tone falsely cordial. "Terrible business, that fire. Such a shame." "What do you want, Harrington?" Noah asked bluntly, ignoring the feigned sympathy. Harrington dismounted, brushing dust from his immaculate suit. "I've come with a proposition. In light of recent events, the bank is willing to extend your loan period." Noah's expression revealed nothing, but Sarah could see the sudden tension in his shoulders. "On what terms?" "Reasonable ones." Harrington smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. "An additional 6 months to repay, with an adjustment to the interest rate, of course." "How generous," Noah replied, his voice flat. "And what do you want in exchange for this sudden benevolence?" Harrington's gaze shifted briefly to Sarah before returning to Noah. "Simply a signed agreement regarding water rights. The eastern branch of the creek technically crosses both properties. The bank would like clarification on ownership before extending further credit." "The water rights are clear," Old Ben interjected. "Have been since Joseph Martin and William Sullivan signed the original agreement in 1845. "Ah, but that agreement was between individuals, not the bank," Harrington countered smoothly. "And with Twin Oaks abandoned these past years, the situation has evolved." Noah's expression hardened. "You mean you want me to sign over my claim to the spring water in exchange for a loan extension?" "A mutually beneficial arrangement," Harrington insisted. "You get time to recover from the drought, and the bank secures clear title to water rights that will make Twin Oaks more valuable when it eventually sells." Sarah could remain silent no longer. "Twin Oaks isn't yours to sell, Mr. Harrington." All eyes turned to her as she approached, chin raised defiantly, despite the dirt on her hands and the sweat on her brow from garden work. Harrington's smile thinned. "Miss Thornton, I presume your reputation precedes you." His gaze assessed her coolly. "I understand you claim some connection to the Martin estate." "My mother was Clara Martin," Sarah stated firmly, "Joseph Martin's only child and heir. I have the deed and will to prove it." A flash of something annoyance concern crossed Harrington's face before his smooth mask returned. "Interesting. However, the Martin estate has significant tax arrears. The county has the right to auction the property to satisfy those debts." "Debts that seem to have appeared quite suddenly," Noah remarked, his tone deceptively casual, considering Joseph Martin was known for paying his obligations promptly. Harrington's eyes narrowed slightly. "Tax records from the war years are incomplete, but the county's claim is quite legitimate, I assure you." An uncomfortable silence followed the tension palpable in the hot afternoon air. Finally, Harrington sighed theatrically. "I'm simply trying to resolve a complicated situation amicably," he said. "Sign the water rights agreement, Sullivan, and you get your loan extension. Miss Thornton, if you have a legitimate claim to Twin Oaks, I'm sure we can come to some arrangement regarding the back taxes." His smile returned sharp as a blade. "Otherwise, both properties will face foreclosure by summer's end. A tragedy for all concerned." Sarah glanced at Noah, seeing the conflict in his expression. The loan extension would give Whisper Creek a chance to survive until the rains came, but signing away the water rights would mean surrendering the ranch's long-term future. "I need time to consider," Noah said finally. "Of course," Harrington agreed smoothly. "You have until Friday." He mounted his horse with practiced ease. 3 days, Sullivan. Choose wisely." With that, he and his companions rode away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. "He's lying about the taxes," Ben said once they were out of earshot. "Joseph Martin paid every penny he owed even during the war." "Can you prove it?" Noah asked, his gaze still fixed on the retreating figures. Ben hesitated. "Records were lost when the courthouse burned in '67. But I remember Martin showing me the receipts himself." "Memories aren't proof," Noah said grimly. "Not against a bank with friends in the county offices." Sarah stepped closer. "Noah, you can't sign away the water rights. Without that spring, without that loan extension, there won't be a ranch to worry about." He interrupted, his voice sharp with frustration. "Harrington knows exactly how tight our situation is." "There must be another way," Sarah insisted. Noah's gray eyes met hers, weariness warring with determination. "If you have suggestions, I'm listening." Before Sarah could respond, a young ranch hand came running from the eastern pasture. "Mr. Sullivan Creek's changed course at the burn site," he reported breathlessly. "Water's flowing east instead of west now." Noah's expression darkened. "That's what the fire was really about," he muttered. "Not just to pressure us, but to physically alter the creek bed." He turned to Ben. "Get the men. We need to see how bad it is." As Noah strode toward the stables, Sarah hurried to keep pace with him. "I'm coming with you." He glanced at her, about to refuse, then nodded curtly. "Get a horse from the corral. And bring Daniel, I want him to see this." 20 minutes later, they were riding east, following the nearly dry creek bed toward the boundary. Daniel rode double with Ben, his young face serious as the old foreman explained the history of the water-sharing agreement between the Sullivan and Martin families. Both ranches needed the water, Ben told him, so they agreed to split it equally. A small dam at the spring directs half the flow west to Whisper Creek, half east to Twin Oaks. "But if the creek bed changed," Daniel began, "then the natural flow goes entirely to Twin Oaks," Ben confirmed. "Exactly what Harrington wants." When they reached the site of the fire, the situation became immediately clear. The intense heat had baked the creek bed, and subsequent erosion had altered its course. Instead of dividing at the spring, the water now flowed almost entirely eastward toward Twin Oaks. Noah dismounted, examining the altered landscape with a grim expression. "This was deliberate," he said quietly. "The fire was set precisely where it would do this kind of damage." Sarah slid from her horse, joining him at the creek bank. The once clear spring now bubbled through ash and debris, its flow diminished and diverted. "Can it be fixed?" she asked. Noah knelt, examining the altered creek bed. "With enough men and time, yes, but we don't have either," Ben finished from atop his horse. "Not with cattle to move and fences to mend before Harrington's deadline." Daniel, who had been examining the spring intently, suddenly spoke up. What if we don't try to fix the old path? What if we make a new one? Instead, Noah looked up at the boy. What do you mean? Daniel dismounted awkwardly, joining them at the creek bank. The problem is, the bank collapsed here, forcing the water east. But what if we built a new channel, not trying to restore the old one, but creating a more direct route to Whisper Creek? He knelt using a stick to draw in the soft earth. See, instead of following the original bend cut straight through here, it's a shorter distance, so the water would naturally want to flow that way. Noah studied the boy's improvised map, then the surrounding landscape. It could work, he said slowly. We'd need to dig a straight channel, reinforce the banks. He glanced at Ben. What do you think? The old foreman nodded thoughtfully. Boy's got a good idea. Might take less time than trying to rebuild what was destroyed. Hope flickered in Noah's expression for the first time since the fire. We'll start tomorrow at dawn. Every available man. As they remounted to return to the ranch, Sarah caught up to Noah, riding alongside him. If you can restore the water flow, will you still need Harrington's loan extension? She asked quietly. Noah's expression grew somber again. The extension would help, but it's a devil's bargain. Once Harrington has a legal claim to the water rights, he'll find ways to divert the flow regardless of what channel we build. Then don't sign, Sarah urged. Fight him another way. Easy to say, Noah replied, a hint of bitterness in his voice. Not so easy to do when people's livelihoods depend on your decisions. They rode in silence for a moment before Sarah spoke again. My father used to say that the right path is rarely the easiest one. Noah glanced at her, a flicker of something respect, perhaps, in his gray eyes. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Sarah said softly. And he would have admired you, Noah Sullivan, regardless of which side you fought on during the war. The unexpected compliment seemed to catch Noah off guard. He looked away, but not before Sarah caught the hint of emotion that crossed his weathered features. High praise, he said finally, coming from the daughter of a Union captain. Truth, Sarah corrected, from someone who's watched you fight for your land and your people with every ounce of strength you possess. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of mutual respect that transcended their different backgrounds and potentially conflicting interests. As they rode back to the ranch, the setting sun casting long shadows across the drought-parched land, Sarah found herself facing an uncomfortable realization. Her future and Noah's were becoming increasingly intertwined in ways that complicated her carefully laid plans. Twin Oaks represented security for her brothers, the fulfillment of her promise to her parents. But claiming it might come at the cost of Whisper Creek's survival. And that cost, she was beginning to understand, was one she was increasingly unwilling to pay. The next 3 days passed in a blur of frantic activity. Every able-bodied person at Whisper Creek worked from dawn until dusk on Daniel's Creek diversion plan. Men dug the new channel while others reinforced its banks with rocks and timber. Martha and Sarah kept the workers fed and hydrated, trudging back and forth from the ranch house with supplies. Even Lucas and James joined the effort, carrying water and tools to the working men. Sarah noticed with approval how the two boys had gradually formed a tentative friendship, their initial wariness giving way to shared interests and mutual respect. By the third day, Harrington's deadline, the new channel was complete. Noah stood at its head where the spring water bubbled from the ground and directed the final adjustments to the small dam that would ensure equal flow to both properties. "Ready?" he asked, looking around at the gathered workers. At their nods, he and Ben removed the temporary barrier they had constructed. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then slowly but steadily, Water began flowing down the newly cut channel heading west toward Whisper Creek Ranch. A cheer went up from the exhausted workers. Noah's face relaxed into a rare smile as he watched the life-giving water reclaim its path to his land. "We did it," Daniel said, beaming with pride at seeing his idea brought to successful fruition. "You did it," Noah corrected, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "That quick mind of yours have saved Whisper Creek." Daniel flushed with pleasure at the praise standing taller beneath Noah's approving gaze. The celebration was short-lived, however, as the workers began gathering their tools to return to the ranch. The sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention. Victor Harrington rode at the head of a group of 6 men, his expression darkening as he observed the newly constructed channel. "Impressive engineering, Sullivan," he called as he approached, his voice carrying a dangerous edge despite his pleasant words. "But, ultimately, futile." Noah stepped forward, positioning himself between Harrington and the workers. "The deadline's not until sundown, Harrington. I haven't given you my answer yet." "This," Harrington gestured contemptuously at the new channel, "is answer enough. You've made your choice." "I've chosen not to be blackmailed," Noah replied evenly. "The water flows equally to both properties as it has for generations. The original agreement stands." Harrington's facade of civility dropped away. "That agreement was between the Sullivans and the Martins. Twin Oaks belongs to the bank now." "No," Sarah stepped forward, her voice clear and firm. "Twin Oaks belongs to the Martin heirs, me and my brothers." Harrington's cold gaze shifted to her. "Proving that claim would require a court hearing, Miss Thornton. Courts move slowly in Texas, especially for the daughter of a Union officer claiming Southern land." The deliberate revelation sent a ripple of reaction through the Whisper Creek men. Lucas's head snapped up, his eyes widening as he looked from Sarah to Noah. "Uncle Noah," the boy questioned confusion and the first stirrings of betrayal in his voice. "Not now, Lucas," Noah said firmly, his attention still fixed on Harrington. "What do you want Harrington state your business and be done with it?" The banker smiled thinly. "I'm simply here to inform you that the Lancaster County Bank is calling in your loans. Full payment due in 2 weeks, or Whisper Creek Ranch will be auctioned to satisfy the debt." A murmur ran through the gathered workers. Noah's expression remained impassive, but Sarah could see the tension in his jaw and the tightening of his shoulders. "That's not the original agreement," Ben objected. "The terms were quarterly payments for 3 years. "Read the fine print, old man," Harrington said dismissively. "The bank reserves the right to demand full payment if the borrower's financial situation becomes untenable." His cold gaze swept over the drought-stricken landscape. "I'd say losing your primary water source qualifies." "We haven't lost anything," Noah countered. "The new channel restores the original flow." "For now," Harrington agreed with mock pleasantry, "but channels can be redirected." He nodded toward one of his men. "Jenkins here used to be an engineer with the Army Corps. He assures me that a properly placed explosive charge could send all that water right back to Twin Oaks land." The threat hung in the air, brazen in its directness. Sarah felt a cold fury building within her at the man's callous disregard for the livelihoods he threatened. "That would be destruction of private property," Noah said, his voice deceptively calm. "A crime, last I checked." Harrington shrugged. "Accidents happen, Sullivan, especially in drought conditions." His gaze shifted to Sarah. "As for you, Miss Thornton, I suggest you reconsider your position. A young woman with 2 children to support should be practical. The bank could offer a fair price for any claim you might have to Twin Oaks, enough to start fresh elsewhere. And if I refuse, Sarah challenged, stepping closer to Noah in a deliberate show of solidarity. Then you'll win Texas courts unsympathetic to Northern claimants, Harrington replied coldly, particularly when those claims interfere with progress. Noah moved forward suddenly, his patience clearly exhausted. You've delivered your message, Harrington. Now get off my land before I have my men escort you off. For a tense moment, it seemed Harrington might refuse. Then, with a calculating smile, he reined his horse around. 2 weeks, Sullivan, he called over his shoulder. I'll be generous and accept cash or cattle, though I doubt you have enough of either. With that parting shot, he and his men rode away, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Noah turned to his workers. Back to the ranch. We've got cattle to move and decisions to make. The men dispersed slowly, their expressions troubled. Lucas lingered, his young face a storm of conflicting emotions as he looked between Noah and Sarah. Is it true? He demanded. Her father was a Yankee officer. Noah met his nephew's gaze steadily. Yes, Captain Robert Thornton of the Union Army. A brave man who died protecting his family, just like your father died protecting his. And you knew all this time? Lucas's voice cracked with betrayal. After what they did to Pa, Lucas, Noah interrupted firmly. Your father died fighting for what he believed in. So did Sarah's father. The war's been over 7 years. It's time we stopped letting it destroy what's left. The boy stared at his uncle, years of ingrained hatred, warring with the respect and love he felt for the man who had raised him. Without another word, he turned and stalked away, his slender shoulders rigid with emotion. Sarah approached Noah as the others dispersed. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I never meant to cause division between you and Lucas. Noah sighed, running a hand through his dust-streaked hair. It's not your fault. The boy's been carrying his father's death like a stone around his neck for years, blaming every Northerner for what happened at Gettysburg. Where his father died, Sarah guessed. Noah nodded, his gray eyes distant with memory. And where I lost this. He flexed his left arm stiffly. Confederate surgeons wanted to amputate. A Union doctor saved it instead, ironically enough. Sarah absorbed this information, understanding better. Now the complex man before her, a former Confederate officer, who seemed to hold none of the bitter resentment so common among veterans who had welcomed the children of a Union captain into his home. What will you do about Harrington? She asked. Noah's expression hardened. Fight him any way I can. But with 2 weeks to raise that kind of money, he shook his head. It would take a miracle. Sarah thought of the deed in her satchel, the legal claim to Twin Oaks that might provide security for her brothers, but could also, if Harrington's threats were to be believed, be tied up in court for years. Maybe there's another way, she said slowly. A way that benefits both of us. Noah looked at her questioningly. I'm listening. Let me think on it tonight, Sarah replied. We'll talk tomorrow. As they made their way back to the ranch, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities and risks. The solution forming in her thoughts was unorthodox, perhaps even dangerous. But faced with Harrington's ruthlessness and the imminent threat to both Twin Oaks and Whisper Creek, conventional approaches seemed inadequate. That evening, after dinner, she found Noah in his study poring over account books by lamplight. His face was drawn with exhaustion, the lines around his eyes deeper than ever. You should rest, Sarah said from the doorway. Tomorrow will be soon enough for calculations. Noah looked up, a weary half-smile touching his lips. Rest is a luxury I can't afford right now. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. You said you had an idea. Sarah entered, closing the door behind her for privacy. She took the offered seat, gathering her thoughts before speaking. What if we combine our interests, she suggested. My legal claim to Twin Oaks with your established presence at Whisper Creek. Noah's brow furrowed. What exactly are you proposing? A partnership, Sarah said simply. I legally claim Twin Oaks as my inheritance. You maintain Whisper Creek. Together we control the entire water system, the spring, the creek, everything Harrington wants to control. Harrington would still foreclose on my loans, Noah pointed out. Not if we can prove that foreclosure would damage Twin Oaks' value, Sarah countered. If the two properties are legally connected through a formal water-sharing agreement, attacking one damages the other. Noah leaned back in his chair, considering her words. It could work in theory, but Harrington has friends in the courts. He could tie up any legal claim you make for years. Then we need to make it more than a legal partnership, Sarah said, her heart racing as she came to the crux of her proposal. We need to make it a union that even Texas courts would hesitate to dissolve. Understanding dawned in Noah's gray eyes. You're suggesting marriage, he said quietly. Sarah nodded, fighting to keep her voice steady. A marriage of convenience to protect both properties. My claim to Twin Oaks, combined with your established rights at Whisper Creek, would create a legal entity Harrington would find much harder to challenge. Noah studied her face in the lamplight. That's an extreme solution, Sarah. These are extreme circumstances, she replied. Harrington threatens both our futures. Together, we might have a chance against him. A marriage should be more than a legal strategy, Noah said carefully. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. Of course. I'm not suggesting. That is, it would be an arrangement for mutual benefit, nothing more. Something flickered in Noah's expression. Disappointment. Or was she merely projecting her own conflicted feelings? Your brothers, he said after a moment. How would they feel about such an arrangement? They've grown to respect you, Sarah answered truthfully. Daniel admires your integrity, and James practically worships you already. She hesitated, then added softly, They need stability, Noah. A home. Something I can't provide alone, not with Harrington arrayed against us. Noah rose from his desk and moved to the window, gazing out at the night. Sarah watched him, trying to read his thoughts in the set of his shoulders, the angle of his head. And what of your own feelings? He asked finally, still facing away. Could you tie yourself to a man you've known only weeks? A former enemy soldier with a failing ranch and a wounded arm. The question caught Sarah off guard with its directness. She had been prepared to discuss practicalities, legal strategies, financial arrangements, not feelings she herself had barely begun to acknowledge. She faltered, then steadied herself. I respect you, Noah, more than any man I've known since my father. Whether you fought for the North or South means nothing compared to the man I've seen these past weeks, honorable, determined, willing to sacrifice for those who depend on you. She rose, moving to stand beside him at the window. As for your arm, we all carry wounds from the war, Noah. Some visible, some hidden. They're part of who we are, not something to be ashamed of. Noah turned to face her, his expression softening in the dim light. For a moment, Sarah thought he might reach for her hand, bridge the small distance between them. Instead, he said quietly, I need time to consider. This affects more than just us, Lucas, the ranch hands, everyone who depends on Whisper Creek. Of course, Sarah agreed, stepping back slightly. It's not a decision to make hastily. Noah nodded, his gaze still studying her face, as if searching for something. Thank you, Sarah, for the suggestion and for... He paused, seeming to struggle for words. For seeing possibilities where I saw only problems. As Sarah left the study, closing the door softly behind her, she found herself trembling slightly. Her proposal had been born of practical necessity, a strategic alliance against a common enemy. Yet, as she had spoken the words, something deeper had stirred within her, a recognition that her feelings for Noah Sullivan had grown beyond respect into something far more complicated and potentially dangerous. A marriage of convenience, she had called it. But standing there in his study, looking into those storm-gray eyes, Sarah had glimpsed the possibility of something else entirely, something that both thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. The following morning dawned hot, and still the drought's grip unrelenting, despite the previous day's small victory with the creek diversion. Sarah rose early, helping Martha prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, while her mind churned with thoughts of her conversation with Noah. Had she been too forward, too calculating, or perhaps not calculating enough, proposing a marriage without fully considering all the implications for herself and her brothers? She was placing plates on the kitchen table when a commotion in the yard drew her attention. Wiping her hands on her apron, she moved to the window just as Lucas burst through the back door, his young face flushed with excitement. "They found water," he announced breathlessly. "Daniel and Ben, they found a new spring on the north boundary." Martha looked up sharply from the stove. "What? Where?" "Where the lightning struck that old oak last summer," Lucas explained. Daniel was helping Ben check the north fence line and noticed water seeping up where the roots had been torn out. "Ben says it's a proper spring, could feed the whole north pasture if we dig it out." Sarah's heart leaped at the news. A new water source could change everything for Whisper Creek, providing the desperately needed sustenance for cattle and crops, potentially saving the ranch from Harrington's schemes. "Where's Noah?" she asked. "Already riding out with Daniel and some of the men," Lucas replied. "Sent me to fetch tools and more hands." The next few hours were a flurry of activity as every available person at Whisper Creek focused on developing the newly discovered spring. By mid-afternoon, when Sarah rode out with Martha to bring food to the workers, significant progress had been made. Men had dug out a substantial pool where the water bubbled up from underground, while others constructed a simple dam to direct the flow. Noah stood knee-deep in the precious liquid, directing the work, his face alight with renewed hope. Daniel spotted Sarah first, waving excitedly from where he stood, with old Ben pointing at something on a hand-drawn map. "Sarah, come see what we found," he called. She made her way through the busy workers to her brother's side. Daniel's face was streaked with dirt, but his eyes shone with pride. "Ben says this spring connects to an underground stream," he explained eagerly. "It could provide water for the entire north section of the ranch, maybe more." Ben nodded, his weathered face creased in a rare smile. "Boy's got a good eye. Noticed the damp ground where everyone else just saw mud." Sarah hugged her brother, a fierce pride warming her heart. "That's wonderful, Daniel. And look," Daniel continued, pointing to the map Ben had sketched. "If we channel it right, we can create a reservoir here with overflow feeding both the north pasture and the east creek, giving us two independent water sources," Noah added, approaching from the spring water dripping from his boots and trousers. Despite his sodden appearance, his expression was more animated than Sarah had seen since their arrival at Whisper Creek. "One Harrington doesn't even know exists yet." "Will it be enough?" Sarah asked. "To save the ranch." Noah's smile faded slightly. "It helps, certainly. Gives us options we didn't have yesterday. But Harrington's deadline still stands full payment in 2 weeks, or foreclosure." "But with a new water source, couldn't you secure a loan from another bank?" Sarah suggested. "Perhaps in Fort Worth or San Antonio." "Possibly," Noah acknowledged. "Though Harrington has influence with most lenders in the region." His gaze moved to where Lucas was working alongside James, showing the younger boy how to stack rocks to reinforce the dam. "But you're right, this changes our situation, gives us more room to maneuver." As the day progressed, Sarah found herself watching Noah the way he worked tirelessly alongside his men, never asking anyone to do what he wouldn't do. Himself, his natural leadership evident in every decision and direction. She had grown to admire him during their weeks at Whisper Creek, but seeing him now revitalized by hope, she realized her feelings had deepened into something far more complex than mere admiration. The sun was beginning to set when Noah finally called a halt to the day's work. The spring had been fully excavated, a small dam constructed, and channels dug to direct the water where it was most needed. Men gathered their tools, weary, but satisfied with their accomplishment. Noah approached Sarah as she helped Martha pack up the remains of the meal they had brought. "Your brother's discovery may have saved Whisper Creek," he said quietly. "I'm in his debt." Sarah smiled. Daniel's always had a knack for seeing what others miss. "Our father used to say he had the sharpest eyes in Missouri." Noah nodded, glancing to where Daniel stood, with Ben still discussing plans for the reservoir. "He's a remarkable young man. You've raised him well." "I've done my best," Sarah replied, "though it hasn't been easy since our parents died." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the men preparing to return to the ranch. Finally Noah spoke again, his voice low enough that only Sarah could hear. "I've been thinking about your proposal." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "And—" Noah turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious in the fading light. "It's a practical solution to our mutual problem with Harrington. Combining our interests would strengthen both our positions. But," Sarah prompted, sensing his hesitation, "but marriage is more than a legal strategy," he said, echoing his words from the previous night. "It's a commitment before God, and community one I wouldn't enter into lightly, or for mere convenience." Sarah felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "I understand. It was presumptuous of me to suggest—" "No," Noah interrupted gently. "It was brave and practical qualities I've come to admire in you." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "If we were to consider such an arrangement, it would need to be with the understanding that it might become more than strategy over time. I wouldn't want either of us trapped in a loveless union for the sake of property rights." The implication of his words sent a warmth spreading through Sarah that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. Was Noah suggesting that he might in time come to feel for her what she was beginning to feel for him? "I believe," she said carefully, "that respect and common purpose are a stronger foundation for marriage than many can claim. The rest might follow, given time." Something softened in Noah's expression. "Then perhaps we should discuss this further once we've returned to the ranch." Their conversation was interrupted by a shout from one of the men. Looking up, Sarah saw 6 riders approaching from the East Harrington, at their head his expression thunderous, even at a distance. Noah's posture changed instantly, tension replacing the momentary openness of their conversation. "Get behind me," he said quietly to Sarah, "and stay close to Martha." Harrington reined in his horse a few yards from where the Whisper Creek men had gathered, his cold gaze taking in the newly developed spring with obvious displeasure. "Trespassing now, Sullivan," he called. "This land belongs to the Lancaster Land Company." This is Whisper Creek property," Noah countered firmly. "Has been since my grandfather's day. The boundary markers are clear." Harrington smiled thinly. "Perhaps you should check your surveys again. The north boundary runs along the ridge line, not the valley." "That's a lie." Ben spoke up, his voice steady, despite his advanced age. "I helped set those boundary stones myself 40 years ago. This spring is on Sullivan land, clear as day." "The word of an old Negro against legal documents," Harrington said dismissively. I don't think that will stand up in court. He nodded to his men. Show them the survey. One of Harrington's companions unrolled a map, holding it up for all to see. From where she stood, Sarah could make out boundary lines that indeed showed the north edge of Whisper Creek Ranch, running along the ridge rather than through the valley where they now stood. That survey's been altered, Noah said flatly. The original boundary has always included this valley. Prove it, Harrington challenged. Oh, wait, you can't. The original survey was lost in the courthouse fire, as I recall. His smile widened. Fortunate that the bank kept its own copy, isn't it? The blatant manipulation left Sarah breathless with anger. Harrington was not only threatening foreclosure, but now attempting to steal the newly discovered water source through forged documents. Noah's men had moved closer, forming a protective semicircle around their employer. The tension in the air was palpable, a spark away from violence. This is still my land, Noah stated, his voice dangerously calm. And you're trespassing, Harrington. I suggest you leave before this gets ugly. Harrington's eyes narrowed. Threatening me won't help your case, Sullivan. In fact, it might accelerate the foreclosure process. His gaze shifted to Sarah. Unless, of course, Miss Thornton has reconsidered my offer for whatever claim she believes she has to Twin Oaks. Sarah stepped forward, ignoring Noah's warning glance. My family's claim to Twin Oaks is legitimate, Mr. Harrington, and I have no intention of selling to you or anyone else. Such loyalty to land you've never even seen, Harrington mocked. Perhaps you should visit Twin Oaks before making such declarations. The main house is quite dilapidated, I'm afraid. Hardly suitable for a young woman and 2 children. Whether the house stands or falls doesn't matter, Sarah replied firmly. The land is my mother's legacy to us, and we intend to claim it. Something calculating entered Harrington's expression. Interesting. Your mother's legacy. He turned to Noah. Did you know, Sullivan, that Clara Martin was formally disowned by her father, cut out of his will when she married that Union captain? Noah's face remained impassive. Joseph Martin's will is a matter of public record. If he changed it, there would be documentation. Indeed, there would, Harrington agreed silkily. Documentation that might be found in the county records office if one knew where to look. The implication was clear. Harrington had access to or had fabricated documents that could invalidate Sarah's claim to Twin Oaks. Before Noah could respond, Lucas suddenly spoke up from where he stood with the other ranch hands. You're a liar, the boy said clearly, his young voice carrying across the tense gathering. Just like you lied about setting the fire at the creek. Harrington's gaze snapped to Lucas, his expression hardening. Watch your tongue, boy. Wait, Kiye, Lucas challenged, stepping forward despite Noah's warning gesture. Everyone knows you paid Monroe and his men to set that fire. Just like everyone knows you've been falsifying bank records for years. A dangerous silence followed Lucas's accusation. Sarah held her breath, watching Harrington's face shift from surprise to cold fury. Serious accusations from a child, he said finally. Ones that could have serious consequences for your uncle's already precarious situation. Not accusations, came a new voice from behind them. Facts. All heads turned to see Daniel emerging from behind the line of ranch hands, a leather portfolio clutched in his hands. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat. What was her brother doing? Daniel, she began warningly, but the boy continued, his young face set with determination. I found these in the old ledgers, he announced, holding up the portfolio. Receipts for water rights payments from Joseph Martin to William Sullivan, countersigned by the county clerk. And, he added, pulling out another document, the original boundary survey with the county seal. Harrington's face paled slightly. Where did you get those? Old Ben stepped forward, standing protectively beside Daniel. Joseph Martin gave them to me for safekeeping before he died. Said he didn't trust certain parties in Lancaster. The old foreman's gaze bored into Harrington. Seems he was right to be cautious. For the first time, Harrington seemed genuinely unsettled. His gaze darted between the documents in Daniel's hands, Noah's resolute expression, and his own men who were beginning to look uncertain. "This changes nothing," Harrington said finally, though his voice lacked its previous confidence. "The foreclosure still stands. 2 weeks, Sullivan." He reined his horse around sharply. "Enjoy your new spring while you can." As Harrington and his men rode away, the tension among the Whisper Creek workers gradually eased. Noah turned to Daniel, his expression a mixture of amazement and approval. "Those documents," he said, "are they really what you claimed?" Daniel nodded, opening the portfolio to reveal yellowed papers carefully preserved between oilcloth sheets. "Ben showed me where to find them yesterday. He thought they might help." Ben placed a gnarled hand on the boy's shoulder. Joseph Martin was a cautious man. Kept copies of everything, especially after the trouble with the bank started. The old foreman's eyes twinkled. "Thought it best to wait for the right moment to reveal our hand." Noah examined the documents carefully, his expression growing more incredulous as he read. "These aren't just boundary surveys," he said finally. "There's correspondence here between Joseph Martin and my father, discussing a potential merger of the two properties through," he glanced up at Sarah, "through a marriage between their children." Sarah's breath caught. "What?" Noah handed her one of the letters. "It seems our grandfathers had the same idea you did years before the war tore everything apart." Sarah read the faded handwriting with growing astonishment. The letter, dated 1858, outlined a proposed arrangement whereby the Martin and Sullivan properties would be joined through marriage between Clara Martin and James Sullivan, Noah's older brother, she presumed. "The war changed everything," Ben explained quietly. "James joined the Confederate cavalry, was killed at Gettysburg. Clara had already married your father by then and moved to Missouri. The old men's plans died with James." Sarah looked up at Noah, finding his gray eyes already on her, something unreadable in their depths. "It seems," he said softly, "that our families were destined to be joined one way or another." The implication of his words hung in the air between them, charged with possibilities neither had fully acknowledged until this moment. Martha's practical voice broke the spell. "Well, these documents won't feed us, and the light's failing. Time we all headed back to the ranch." As they gathered their tools and prepared to return to Whisper Creek, Noah drew Sarah aside, his voice low and meant for her ears alone. "We need to talk tonight," he said. "After dinner." Sarah nodded, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs. "Yes, I think we do." The ride back to the ranch passed in a blur, Sarah's mind whirling with the implications of Daniel's discovery. Not only did the documents secure the spring as part of Whisper Creek property, they revealed a connection between their families that predated the war, a planned union that circumstance had prevented. Was it possible that her impulsive proposal had unknowingly echoed plans laid by their grandfathers nearly 2 decades earlier? And what did that mean for her and Noah now, as they faced their own crisis with Harrington? As the ranch buildings came into view silhouetted against the setting sun, Sarah found herself both eager for and apprehensive about the conversation to come, a conversation that might well determine not just her future, but the futures of all those who called Whisper Creek home. Dinner that evening was a subdued affair despite the day's victories. The discovery of the spring and Daniel's revelation of the crucial documents had shifted the balance of power, but Harrington's threat of foreclosure still loomed. The ranch hands ate quickly before retiring to the bunkhouse, their conversation muted, weighted with concern for Whisper Creek's uncertain future. Sarah found herself watching Noah throughout the meal. He spoke little, his attention seemingly focused on his plate, but she could sense the intensity of his thoughts. Occasionally his gray eyes would lift to meet hers across the table, and something unspoken would pass between them, a current of shared purpose and growing connection that made her heart beat faster. Martha, perceptive as always, noticed these exchanges. As she served apple cobbler for dessert, the older woman's knowing gaze moved between Sarah and Noah, a slight smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. After helping with the dishes, Sarah put her brothers to bed. James fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the day's excitement. But Daniel remained awake, propped up against his pillow, with an old book of ranch management Ben had lent him. "You did something remarkable today," Sarah told him, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Those documents may save Whisper Creek." Daniel looked up from his book, his young face serious beyond his years. "Do you think Mr. Sullivan will let us stay here, even after we're supposed to leave for Twin Oaks?" The question took Sarah by surprise. "Would you want to stay?" Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "I like it here. Ben's teaching me about ranching, and Lucas isn't so mean anymore. James is happier than I've seen him since before Papa and Mama died." He hesitated, then added, "And you seem happier too, Sarah." A warmth spread through Sarah's chest at her brother's perception. "I've been so focused on taking care of you both, on finding us a home, that I haven't thought much about my own happiness," she admitted. "Mr. Sullivan looks at you the way Papa used to look at Mama," Daniel observed matter-of-factly. "And sometimes you look at him the same way." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Daniel." The boy shrugged, unapologetic. "It's true. I'm not a baby, Sarah. I notice things." Indeed he did, Sarah thought ruefully. Her brother's sharp eyes missed little. "Mr. Sullivan and I have been discussing a possible arrangement," she said carefully. "One that might allow us to combine our interests against Harrington." Daniel's eyes widened with understanding. "You're going to marry him?" "It's not decided yet," Sarah cautioned. "We're still discussing the possibility." A slow smile spread across Daniel's face. "But you want to, don't you? Not just because of Harrington and Twin Oaks." Sarah hesitated, then nodded, deciding her brother deserved honesty. "Yes, I think I do. But it's complicated, Daniel. There's so much at stake: Whisper Creek, Twin Oaks, your future, and James's." "I think you should do it," Daniel said with the straightforward certainty of youth. "Mr. Sullivan is a good man. He'd be good to us like Papa was." Sarah leaned forward to kiss his forehead, touched by his simple wisdom. "When did you get so grown up?" Daniel grinned. "Someone had to, with you worrying about everything all the time." After extracting a promise that he would sleep soon, Sarah left her brother's room, her heart lighter despite the uncertainties that still lay ahead. Daniel's approval meant more than she had expected, removing one worry from her burdened shoulders. The house had grown quiet, the day's activities having exhausted its occupants. Sarah made her way to the back porch, drawn by the cooler evening air and the opportunity for quiet reflection before her promised conversation with Noah. The Texas night spread before her, vast and star-filled, the familiar sounds of crickets and distant cattle, creating a peaceful symphony. So different from their small Missouri farm, yet somehow over these weeks it had begun to feel like home. She didn't hear Noah's approach, only becoming aware of his presence when he spoke softly from the doorway. "Beautiful night." Sarah turned, finding him silhouetted against the light from the kitchen. He had changed from his work clothes into a clean shirt, his hair still damp from washing. "It is," she agreed. "Hard to believe there's a drought when the stars are so clear." Noah stepped onto the porch, moving to stand beside her at the railing. For a moment, they stood in companionable silence, gazing out at the starlit landscape. Daniel's discovery was fortunate, Noah said finally. He has a gift for finding what others overlook, Sarah replied. Our father always said he'd make a fine detective or lawyer someday. Noah nodded thoughtfully. The boy's got a sharp mind and good instincts, qualities that will serve him well whatever path he chooses. Another silence fell between them, charged with unspoken thoughts and possibilities. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment, the sense that whatever was said next would irrevocably alter the course of their lives. "Those letters," she began hesitantly, "between our grandfathers, do you think they knew something we didn't? That Whisper Creek and Twin Oaks belong together?" Noah turned slightly, his profile outlined against the night sky. "Maybe they understood something we're just beginning to grasp, that divided both properties are vulnerable. United, they could thrive." His gaze shifted to meet hers. "Much like people, I suppose." The implication of his words hung in the air between them, filled with meaning neither had fully articulated until now. "I've been thinking about your proposal," Noah continued, his voice low and steady. "A marriage to combine our interests against Harrington." Sarah's heart quickened. "And it makes practical sense," he acknowledged. "Together, we'd present a united front that would be much harder for Harrington to break apart." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "But I find myself wondering if practicality is enough reason to enter into such a sacred covenant." Disappointment began to settle in Sarah's chest. Was he about to refuse her suggestion? "What other reason would you need?" she asked quietly. Noah turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intent in the dim light. "What about affection, Sarah? Respect? The possibility of something deeper growing between us over time?" Hope fluttered in her heart, replacing the momentary disappointment. "I already respect you, Noah, more than any man I've known since my father." "And I you," he replied softly. "Your courage, your determination to protect your brothers, your willingness to work alongside us without complaint, these are qualities any man would admire." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool evening air. "But there's more than respect between us, isn't there?" he asked, his voice dropping to little more than a whisper. "Something neither of us planned, something that's been growing these past weeks, despite all the reasons it shouldn't." Sarah found herself unable to look away from his gaze, the intensity she found there both thrilling and terrifying. "Yes," she admitted, her own voice barely audible, "though I've tried to deny it to focus only on practical matters." A smile touched Noah's lips, transforming his usually serious expression. "Practical matters, like suggesting marriage to a man you've known less than a month?" Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. It seemed the most straightforward solution to our mutual problem. "Straightforward?" Noah repeated, amusement warming his voice. "I'm not sure that's the word most would use for such a proposal." Despite her embarrassment, Sarah found herself smiling in response. "Perhaps not, but these are unusual circumstances." "Indeed they are." Noah's expression grew serious again. "Which is why I want to be absolutely clear about what I'm proposing." Sarah's breath caught. "You're proposing?" Noah nodded, his gaze steady on hers. "I am. Not just a marriage of convenience or a strategic alliance, though it would serve those purposes as well. I'm proposing a real marriage, Sarah, one based on mutual respect and affection now, with the hope, the belief that deeper feelings will grow between us over time." He took her hand gently in his touch sending a current of warmth up her arm. "I won't pretend to be in love, Sarah. That would dishonor us both. But I care for you more than I expected to, more than is entirely sensible given our short acquaintance. And I believe you feel the same." Sarah's heart thundered in her chest, emotion constricting her throat. This was more than she had dared hope for, yet exactly what she had secretly wished. "I do," she acknowledged softly, "though I've tried to tell myself it was merely gratitude or admiration." Noah's smile returned gentle and warm. "Then perhaps we can build something real together, a life, a family, a legacy that combines the best of both our inheritances." He paused, his expression growing solemn. "But I need you to be certain, Sarah. Marriage is not something I take lightly, nor should you. Once we make this commitment, I intend to honor it fully regardless of what happens with Harrington or the properties." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. This was no cold business arrangement he was proposing, but a true partnership with all the potential for joy and sorrow that entailed. "What about Lucas?" she asked, practical concerns resurfacing. "He only just learned about my father's service in the Union Army. Will he accept this? Lucas is young, with a young man's passion and stubborn pride," Noah acknowledged. "But he's not unreasonable. He's already grown attached to your brothers, and he respects your work ethic. Given time, I believe he'll come to see you as family." "And my brothers, would you truly accept them as your own?" Noah's expression softened. "Daniel and James are remarkable boys, Sarah. Intelligent, resilient, good-hearted. Any man would be proud to help raise them." His hand tightened slightly around hers. "I would consider it a privilege, not an obligation." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, moved by the sincerity in his voice. "You're offering us more than just shelter or security. You're offering us a home." "Yes," he said simply. "And you're offering me the chance to make Whisper Creek a home again, not just a ranch to be preserved." He hesitated, then added quietly, "It's been a lonely place since my father died, despite Martha and Lucas. You've brought something back to it, life, hope, a future beyond mere survival." The honesty of his admission touched Sarah deeply. Noah Sullivan was not a man who revealed his vulnerabilities easily. That he would do so now spoke volumes about the trust developing between them. "Then, yes," she said, her voice clear and certain, despite the emotions swelling in her chest. "I accept your proposal, Noah Sullivan. For practical reasons, yes, but also for the possibilities it holds for all of us." The smile that transformed Noah's weathered features made him suddenly look younger, the weight of responsibility momentarily lifted from his shoulders. Without words, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles in a gesture both old-fashioned and deeply moving. "We should speak with your brothers tomorrow," he said, "and Martha and Lucas. If we're to make this work against Harrington, we'll need to move quickly." Sarah nodded, practical once more, despite the emotions churning within her. "How quickly? The foreclosure deadline is less than 2 weeks away," Noah replied. "I'd suggest we marry within the week, giving us time to file the necessary papers, combining our property claims before Harrington can act." The reality of their situation reasserted itself, tempering the moment's joy with urgency. Yet Sarah found she didn't regret the practical aspects of their arrangement. In many ways, it was fitting that their union would serve both heart and necessity, much like the marriages of pioneers who had settled this harsh land generations before. "A week, then," she agreed. "Time enough to prepare, but not to doubt." Noah's gray eyes held hers, something unspoken passing between them, an acknowledgement of the leap of faith they were taking together, and a promise to make it more than mere strategy. "Until tomorrow, then," he said softly, releasing her hand with evident reluctance. As he turned to go, Sarah called after him, "Noah." He paused, looking back. "Thank you," she said simply, for seeing possibilities instead of problems, for offering us a future I couldn't have imagined a month ago. A smile touched his lips once more. Thank you for bringing hope back to Whisper Creek, Sarah Thornton. Something tells me our grandfathers would be pleased with how their plans have finally come to fruition, albeit a generation later than they intended. With that, he disappeared into the house, leaving Sarah alone with the Texas night and the stars that suddenly seemed to shine with new promise. The path ahead remained fraught with challenges. Harrington's machinations, the drought, the merging of two families with different histories and loyalties. But for the first time since her parents' deaths, Sarah felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that transcended mere survival. Tomorrow would bring practical matters, explanations, preparations. But tonight, standing on the porch of what would soon become her home in more than just name, Sarah allowed herself to simply feel the joy of finding an unexpected harbor in the storm. The next morning, Sarah rose early, her mind already racing with plans and considerations. The enormity of what she and Noah had agreed to marriage within a week both exhilarated and terrified her. There was so much to arrange, so many people to inform, so little time to prepare. She found Martha already in the kitchen, kneading dough for the day's bread. The older woman looked up as Sarah entered, her shrewd eyes taking in Sarah's slightly flustered appearance. "So," Martha said without preamble, "he finally asked you." Sarah froze in surprise. "How did you—" Martha snorted softly, returning to her kneading. "Been watching you two circle each other for weeks. Only question was whether he'd work up the courage before you left for Twin Oaks." She glanced up, her expression softening slightly. "He told me this morning, before riding out to check the spring. Wanted me to help you with whatever preparations you might need." Relieved that Noah had already spoken with his Aunt Sarah, moved to help with breakfast preparations. "There's so much to do in so little time," she admitted. "I don't even have a proper dress." "We'll manage," Martha assured her. "I've been keeping some things that might suit fabric from when Elizabeth was planning her trousseau." "Elizabeth?" Sarah asked, curious about this previously unmentioned person. "Noah's sister," Martha explained. "Married a merchant from Kansas City and moved north before the war. Haven't heard from her in years." A shadow passed over the older woman's face. War divided more than just nations, after all. Sarah nodded in understanding. So many families had been torn apart by conflicting loyalties, including her own mother's estrangement from her father. "Do you think—" Sarah hesitated, then continued, "do you think she would mind my using her fabric?" Martha's expression softened. "Child, she'd be pleased to know it was being used to bring happiness back to Whisper Creek, especially for Noah. He's carried too many burdens alone for too long." The simple acceptance in Martha's voice eased one of Sarah's concerns. At least Noah's aunt approved of their union, practical though its origins might be. "What about Lucas?" she asked, voicing her most significant worry. "After yesterday, learning about my father," Martha sighed, her hands stilling in the dough. "Lucas is complicated, carries his grief like armor, uses anger to keep the pain at bay." She looked up, meeting Sarah's eyes directly. "But he's not cruel or unreasonable, just young and hurt. Give him time." "Time is something we don't have much of," Sarah pointed out, "with Harrington's deadline approaching." "Then give him honesty," Martha advised. "Treat him like the man he's trying to become, not the child he sometimes acts like. He responds to that." Sarah nodded, taking the advice to heart. "And my brothers? How do I explain this to them? From what I've seen, those boys are sharp as tacks and twice as perceptive," Martha replied with a hint of a smile. "Something tells me they won't be as surprised as you might think." Martha's prediction proved accurate. When Sarah gathered Daniel and James after breakfast to explain the situation, Daniel simply nodded, as if confirming something he already knew, while James's face lit up with undisguised delight. "Does this mean we're staying at Whisper Creek?" James asked excitedly. "Forever." "It means this will be our home, yes," Sarah confirmed, "along with Twin Oaks. The two properties will be joined. Like in the stories Mama used to tell," James said, "about princes and princesses joining kingdoms." Sarah smiled at her youngest brother's romanticized view. "Something like that, though rather less grand, I'm afraid. Will Mr. Sullivan be our father now?" Daniel asked, his practical mind going straight to the heart of the matter. Sarah considered how to answer. "He'll be your guardian, yes, but he doesn't expect to replace our father Daniel. No one could do that." Daniel nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. "He's a good man. Papa would have approved, I think." The simple statement brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. "Thank you, Daniel. That means more than you know." James bounced on his toes, excitement overcoming his usual reserve. "Can I tell Lucas? Please." Sarah hesitated. "I think Mr. Sullivan Noah should speak with Lucas first. This will be a big change for him, too." As if summoned by their conversation, Lucas appeared in the doorway, his young face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Uncle Noah wants to see you all," he announced, his voice carefully neutral. "In his study." Sarah's heart sank at his tone. Had Noah's conversation with his nephew gone poorly? Following Lucas down the hall, her brothers close behind, she prepared herself for potential conflict. Noah stood as they entered his study, his expression serious but not troubled. "Thank you for coming," he said formally. "Please sit." Once they were settled, Sarah and her brothers on one side of the desk, Lucas standing stiffly by the window, Noah addressed them directly. "I've asked your sister to marry me," he said to Daniel and James, his tone straightforward. "She's accepted. The wedding will take place this Saturday, if arrangements can be completed in time." He paused, his gaze moving to include Lucas. "This means that all of us will become family, not just legally, but in every way that matters. I want to be clear about what that means." His gray eyes returned to the boys. "I'm not trying to replace your father. From what Sarah has told me, he was an exceptional man who loved you deeply. I would never presume to take his place in your hearts." Noah leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "What I am offering is to be a guardian, a provider, and I hope a friend. Someone who will protect you, support your dreams, and help you grow into the men your father would have been proud to see." He turned to Lucas. "And I expect you, as the eldest of the young people in this household, to set an example of welcome and respect. Whatever differences existed between our families during the war died with those who fought. We're building something new here, a future that honors the past without being trapped by it." Lucas's posture remained stiff, but something in his expression had softened. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. Noah nodded, apparently satisfied with this minimal acknowledgement. "Now, there are practical matters to discuss. The wedding will be small family and the ranch hands. Reverend Johnson from Lancaster will perform the ceremony, and immediately afterward we'll file the necessary papers combining the Twin Oaks and Whisper Creek properties." "What about Harrington?" Daniel asked, showing his usual perceptiveness. "Won't he try to stop it?" Noah's lips quirked in a brief smile. "Undoubtedly, which is why we'll keep our plans as quiet as possible until they're accomplished. Once the marriage is recorded and the property documents filed, it will be much harder for him to challenge our claims." "Like a secret mission," James whispered excitedly. "Exactly like that," Noah agreed, humor warming his voice. "Which means everyone in this room must be discreet. No discussing our plans with anyone outside the family." The seriousness with which James nodded his understanding brought a smile to Sarah's lips. Her youngest brother clearly viewed the upcoming wedding as a grand adventure rather than the strategic maneuver it partially was. "Good," Noah said, standing to indicate the meeting was concluded. "Martha will help with the preparations. Lucas, I'd like you to ride to Lancaster this afternoon to deliver a note to Reverend Johnson. Daniel, you'll go with him." The clear inclusion of her brother in the ranch's activities touched Sarah deeply. Noah was already treating Daniel as part of the family, giving him responsibilities and trust. As they filed out of the study, Lucas lingered behind, motioning for Sarah to wait. Noah had already moved to his desk, focusing on papers there to give them privacy. "I don't hate you," Lucas said abruptly, his young face working with emotion. "For being a Yankees daughter, I mean." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm glad to hear that, Lucas. Though I'll never apologize for who my father was or what he believed in, just as I'd never expect you to apologize for your father's service to the Confederacy." The boy studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Uncle Noah says you're brave, that you've kept your brothers safe through things that would break most people." He swallowed hard. "My ma, she couldn't. After Pa died, she just faded, like a photograph left in the sun too long." The painful admission, clearly difficult for the proud boy to make, moved Sarah deeply. "I'm sorry, Lucas. Grief affects people differently. Some fight, some flee, some fade. None of those responses are wrong, just different." "I guess," Lucas conceded. "Anyway, I won't make trouble, for the wedding and all." He straightened his shoulders. "If Uncle Noah thinks you're right for Whisper Creek, that's good enough for me." It wasn't a warm welcome, but it was acceptance, a starting point from which respect and perhaps even affection might eventually grow. "Thank you, Lucas," Sarah said sincerely. "That means a great deal to me and to your uncle." The boy nodded awkwardly, then hurried from the room, eager to escape the emotional moment. Sarah turned to find Noah watching her approval warm in his gray eyes. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "Lucas doesn't open up easily." "He's hurting," Sarah replied. "Has been for a long time, I think." Noah nodded, a shadow passing over his features. "Since his father died, my brother James was Lucas's hero, larger than life, bold, charismatic. When news came of his death at Gettysburg, something in Lucas broke, and his mother, unable to bear her own grief, had nothing left to help him with his." "And you?" Sarah asked gently. "James was your brother. You lost him too." A flicker of old pain crossed Noah's face. "I was still in the field when it happened. By the time I made it home after Appomattox, Elizabeth had moved north. My father was failing, and Lucas needed stability more than shared grief." He shrugged his right shoulder, the left remaining characteristically still. "There wasn't time to mourn properly. Too many others depending on me." The simple statement revealed so much about the man before her. His sense of duty, his willingness to set aside his own needs for others, the weight of responsibility he had carried alone for so long. On impulse, Sarah moved around the desk and placed her hand gently on his arm. "You don't have to carry everything alone anymore, Noah. That's what partnership means." Surprise flickered in his eyes, followed by a warmth that made Sarah's heart a beat faster. For a moment, she thought he might pull her closer, perhaps even kiss her. Instead, he covered her hand with his own, squeezing gently. "Thank you," he said simply. The two words carried a wealth of meaning, gratitude, yes, but also acknowledgement of the truth in her statement and acceptance of what she offered. The moment was interrupted by Martha calling from the kitchen, needing Sarah's help with wedding preparations. As she turned to go, Noah's voice stopped her at the door. Sarah, she looked back, finding his expression unusually vulnerable. I want you to know this may have begun as a practical arrangement, but it's become something more to me. He hesitated, then continued. I can't promise grand passion or poetry, but I can promise respect, partnership, and a genuine desire to build something meaningful together. The honest declaration, clearly difficult for the reserved man to make, touched Sarah deeply. That's worth more than poetry, Noah, she replied softly. Far more. As she hurried to help Martha, Sarah's mind whirled with the rapid changes in her circumstances. Just weeks ago, she had been leading her exhausted brothers along a dusty trail, desperate and uncertain of their future. Now she was preparing to marry a man she respected deeply, to join two historic properties, and to create a home for her brothers beyond anything she could have hoped for. That the arrangement also served to counter Harrington's schemes didn't diminish its personal significance. If anything, the shared purpose strengthened the foundation. They were building a union born of practical necessity, but growing with surprising speed into something with the potential for genuine happiness. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a whirlwind of activity. Word spread quickly throughout the ranch, despite their efforts at discretion, and the upcoming union of Whisper Creek's owner and the Martin heir became a cause for celebration among the workers. Many saw it as a strategic alliance against Harrington's encroachment, while others, particularly the older hands, who remembered the pre-war friendship between the Sullivan and Martin families, viewed it as the fulfillment of a long-delayed destiny. Martha and Sarah worked tirelessly on preparations, transforming the simple ranch house for the occasion. The older woman produced treasures from storage, fine linens, silver serving pieces, delicate china that hadn't been used since before the war. From the fabric saved for Elizabeth's trousseau, Martha and Sarah created a wedding dress of surprising elegance, a simple design in pale blue silk that complemented Sarah's coloring and required minimal ornamentation. Noah, meanwhile, focused on securing their legal position. He rode to Lancaster with Ben to speak with a lawyer about combining the property deeds immediately following the ceremony. The documents Daniel had discovered proved invaluable, establishing both the legitimate boundaries of Whisper Creek and Sarah's inheritance rights to Twin Oaks. Harrington, surprisingly, made no move to interfere. His silence was more unnerving than open opposition might have been, suggesting he was planning something they hadn't anticipated. Noah doubled the guards on the boundary, and at the spring, unwilling to risk another sabotage attempt. By Saturday morning, everything was ready. The ranch hands had cleared and decorated the yard between the main house and the barn, setting up benches and tables for the ceremony and subsequent celebration. Martha had overseen the preparation of a feast that belied the ranch's financial difficulties: beef roasted to perfection, fresh bread preserves from her precious stores, and vegetables from the garden Sarah had helped nurture back to productivity. In the small bedroom that had been hers since arriving at Whisper Creek, Sarah stood before the mirror as Martha made final adjustments to her dress. The simple gown with its fitted bodice and flowing skirt transformed her in ways she hadn't expected. For weeks, she had been focused on survival, on practical matters, on securing a future for her brothers. The woman who looked back at her from the mirror seemed a stranger, not just a sister and provider, but a bride. "You look beautiful," Martha said softly, adjusting the small spray of wildflowers she had woven into Sarah's hair. "Your parents would be proud." Tears threatened at the mention of her parents. "I wish they could be here," Sarah admitted, "especially today." Martha squeezed her shoulder gently. "They are, child. In you, in your brothers, in the values they instilled that brought you safely here." The older woman smiled, a rare softening of her usually pragmatic demeanor. "And I believe they would approve of Noah. Despite the circumstances, he's a good man who will honor his vows." "I know," Sarah said, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. Despite their short acquaintance, she had come to trust Noah Sullivan's integrity completely. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew he would face them with the same steadfast determination he brought to everything. A knock at the door heralded Daniel, dressed in his Sunday best, his young face solemn with the responsibility he had been given. "Everything's ready," he announced. "Reverend Johnson just arrived, and Noah's waiting by the oak tree." Sarah nodded, drawing a deep breath to steady her nerves. "Then I suppose it's time." Martha gave her hand a final squeeze before departing to take her place for the ceremony. Daniel remained offering his arm with a gravity that tugged at Sarah's heart. "Papa would have been proud to walk you down the aisle," he said quietly. "I'll do my best to stand in his place." The simple statement, delivered with such earnest dignity, brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. "You do him honor, Daniel, every day." They made their way through the house and onto the front porch, where James waited, practically vibrating with excitement in his new shirt and polished boots. Together, the three siblings who had journeyed so far and endured so much walked toward the gathering beneath the old oak tree that stood in the yard. The ranch hands had assembled in their cleanest clothes, faces freshly shaved, hair slicked down with water, in a valiant attempt at neatness. Martha stood near the front, her usually stern expression softened with emotion. Lucas, to Sarah's surprise, stood beside Noah, serving as his uncle's best man, despite his initial reservations about the union. And Noah himself, Sarah's breath caught at the sight of him. Dressed in a formal black coat that must have been preserved from better days, his tall figure stood straight and proud beneath the spreading branches of the oak. The usual gravity of his expression had given way to something warmer as his eyes found hers, a smile touching his lips as he watched her approach. Reverend Johnson, a kindly man with silver hair and the weathered face of someone accustomed to the harsh Texas elements, nodded encouragingly as Sarah reached the small space that had been left clear before him. "Who gives this woman in marriage?" he asked, following the traditional formula. Daniel stepped forward, his young voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Her brothers do, in the name of our parents, Robert and Clara Thornton." Noah extended his hand, and Sarah placed hers within it, feeling the strength and gentle firmness of his grip. Side by side they faced the Reverend as he began the ceremony that would bind their lives together. The words washed over Sarah, ancient promises of fidelity and devotion, commitment and partnership. When the time came to speak her vows, her voice remained clear and certain. This might have begun as a practical arrangement, but standing here beneath the Texas sky, surrounded by people who had become dear to her in such a short time, Sarah knew it had become something far more meaningful. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Johnson declared finally. "Mr. Sullivan, you may kiss your bride." A murmur of anticipation ran through the gathered witnesses as Noah turned to face Sarah fully. For a heartbeat, their eyes met his gray ones, questioning, seeking permission for this public display of affection that would seal their union. Sarah gave a slight nod, her heart racing with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Noah's hand came up to gently cup her cheek, his touch feather light, before he leaned down to press his lips to hers in a kiss that was brief but unexpectedly tender. The ranch hands erupted in cheers and applause, the celebratory noise startling Sarah as Noah drew back. A flush warmed her cheeks, but she couldn't help smiling at the genuine happiness on the faces surrounding them. "Mrs. Sullivan," Noah said softly, offering his arm. "Mr. Sullivan," she replied, placing her hand in the crook of his elbow. Together they walked back toward the house, accepting congratulations and good wishes from the hands as they passed. Martha had prepared a wedding breakfast in the dining room, a room Sarah had rarely seen used during her stay at Whisper Creek. The table gleamed with polished silver and the fine china that had been brought out for the occasion. As they took their places at the head of the table, Sarah found herself observing the gathering with a sense of wonder. Daniel and James sat with Lucas, the three boys engaged in animated conversation. Martha directed the serving with quiet efficiency, her usually stern expression softened by the day's joy. Ben proposed a toast to the union of the Sullivan and Martin families finally realized after generations of friendship and shared history. It was in every way that mattered a family celebration, not the one Sarah had imagined when dreaming of her future as a young woman in Missouri, but perhaps something even more precious for having been forged through hardship and unexpected connection. Noah leaned close, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Happy?" The simple question caught Sarah by surprise. In the whirlwind of practical preparations and strategic considerations, she had given little thought to her own emotional state. "Yes," she realized the truth of it washing over her. "I am." Noah's smile, rare and transformative, warmed his usually serious features. "Good. That was my hope." The breakfast concluded with Reverend Johnson's blessing, after which Noah rose to address the gathering. "Sarah and I thank you all for your support and good wishes," he said, his deep voice carrying easily through the room. "Now we have one more important task before the real celebrating begins. Ben, are the horses ready?" The old foreman nodded. "Waiting out front, just as you asked." Noah turned to Sarah. "We need to ride to Lancaster immediately to file the marriage certificate and property documents. The county clerk's office closes at noon on Saturdays." Sarah nodded, understanding the urgency. Until the legal paperwork was filed, their strategic alliance against Harrington remained vulnerable. "I'll change quickly," she said, rising from the table. Martha followed her to her room, helping her exchange the silk wedding dress for a practical riding skirt and blouse. "Be careful in Lancaster," the older woman cautioned as she folded the precious dress. "Harrington has eyes and ears everywhere. Get the papers filed and return immediately." "We will," Sarah promised, pinning her hair securely for the ride. Outside, Noah waited with two saddled horses, his own chestnut gelding, and a gentle mare Sarah had ridden during her time at Whisper Creek. He handed her into the saddle with careful courtesy, his hand lingering briefly on hers. "Ready, Mrs. Sullivan?" he asked, a hint of warmth in his formal address. The name still sounded strange to her ears, but not unwelcome. "Ready, Mr. Sullivan," she replied with a small smile. They rode out at a steady pace, the importance of their mission precluding the leisurely journey that might otherwise have marked their wedding day. Sarah found herself studying her new husband as they rode side by side, noting the straight set of his shoulders, the confident way he handled his horse, the occasional softening of his expression when he glanced her way. This man was now her husband, partner, protector, companion in the life they would build together. The thought was still too new to fully comprehend the reality of their union still settling into her consciousness. They had traveled perhaps halfway to Lancaster when Noah suddenly reined in his horse, his posture, alert gaze fixed on the horizon ahead. "What is it?" Sarah asked, pulling her mare to a stop beside him. "Riders," Noah said tersely, "coming from Lancaster. At least 6 of them." Sarah squinted against the bright morning sun, making out the distant figures Noah had already identified. "Harrington?" "Possibly." Noah's expression darkened. "And if so, not likely a coincidence that they're heading toward Whisper Creek on our wedding day." As the riders drew nearer, Sarah's heart sank with recognition. Harrington rode at the head of the group, accompanied by several men she recognized from previous confrontations, plus 2 strangers whose formal attire suggested official capacity. "Noah Sullivan," Harrington called as they approached, his voice carrying a note of false cordiality. And, Mrs. Sullivan, I presume, allow me to offer my congratulations on your nuptials." Noah's expression remained impassive, though Sarah could sense the tension in his posture. "Harrington, what brings you out this way on a Saturday?" Harrington smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. "Official business, I'm afraid." He gestured to the men beside him. "Marshal Fletcher and Judge Pierce have some matters to discuss regarding certain property claims." The marshal, a weathered man with a star pinned to his vest, nodded curtly. "Mr. Sullivan, we have papers here requiring inspection of certain documents allegedly in your possession, specifically those relating to the boundary dispute between Whisper Creek Ranch and the former Martin property." Sarah felt a chill despite the warm morning. "What kind of inspection?" The judge, a pompous-looking man with mutton-chop whiskers, cleared his throat importantly. "Allegations have been made regarding potential forgery of county records. As such, any documents you intend to file must be examined for authenticity before they can be recorded." Noah's jaw tightened. "Convenient timing, Harrington. Almost as if you knew our plans." Harrington spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "Merely a fortunate coincidence. When concerns about potentially fraudulent documents come to light, the court must act swiftly." "These documents are legitimate," Sarah insisted. "They bear the county seal and proper signatures." "That's for the court to determine, Mrs. Sullivan," the judge replied stiffly. "In the meantime, I've issued an injunction preventing the recording of any property transfers involving Twin Oaks Plantation until this matter is resolved." Noah's hand moved to the saddlebag where they had secured the precious documents. "And our marriage certificate, is that also subject to your inspection?" The marshal shook his head. "No, sir. That can be filed as planned. It's only the property matters that are under review." A small mercy, Sarah thought. At least their marriage would be legally recognized, securing some of the protection they had sought. But without the property documents, Harrington could still move forward with the foreclosure on Whisper Creek and challenge her claim to Twin Oaks. "How long will this review take?" Noah asked, his voice level despite the anger Sarah could sense beneath the surface. The judge adjusted his spectacles importantly. "Difficult to say. The court calendar is quite full. Perhaps 2 weeks? Perhaps a month. Conveniently beyond your foreclosure deadline." Noah observed, his gaze fixed on Harrington. The banker smiled thinly. "As I said, a coincidence. Though it does place you in something of a difficult position, doesn't it? Without those documents filed, your loans are still due as scheduled." The brazen manipulation left Sarah breathless with anger. Harrington had obviously learned of their plans, perhaps through a spy at the ranch, or more likely by bribing someone in Lancaster, and had moved quickly to counter them. "This won't stand," Noah said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Judge Pierce, I suggest you consider carefully before allowing yourself to be used as a pawn in Harrington's schemes. The documents in question bear the county seal and were witnessed by the previous clerk. Any examination will only confirm their authenticity." The judge bristled at the implied criticism. "I assure you, Mr. Sullivan, I am acting in strict accordance with the law. If the documents prove genuine, they will be recorded without delay." "After Whisper Creek has been foreclosed upon," Sarah pointed out, unable to contain her outrage. "How convenient for Mr. Harrington's plans to acquire both properties." Harrington's expression hardened. "Careful, Mrs. Sullivan. Such accusations border on slander." He turned to the marshal. "I believe our business here is concluded. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan are of course free to continue to Lancaster to file their marriage certificate. Good day to you both." With that, he wheeled his horse around and headed back toward town, the judge and marshal following reluctantly behind. Only when they were well out of earshot did Noah allow his carefully maintained composure to crack. "Damn him," he muttered, his hand tightening on the reins. "He must have had someone watching the ranch, waiting for our move." Sarah's mind raced, seeking a solution to this unexpected obstacle. What do we do now, without those property documents filed? Whisper Creek remains vulnerable to foreclosure, Noah finished grimly. And your claim to Twin Oaks can still be challenged. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. But our marriage is legal, and that gives us some protection. Harrington can't easily separate your interests from mine now. We should still go to Lancaster, Sarah decided, file the marriage certificate at least, and consult with your lawyer about options for the property documents. Noah nodded, his expression clearing slightly as he focused on the practical steps ahead. You're right. We fight this one battle at a time. He studied her face, concern replacing anger in his gray eyes. I'm sorry, Sarah. This isn't quite the wedding day I had hoped to give you. Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling at his concern. I don't recall peaceful being among the promises we made, only for better or worse, and we're facing the worse part right from the start. A reluctant smile tugged at Noah's lips. Your optimism is remarkable. Not optimism, Sarah corrected. Determination. Harrington may have won this skirmish, but the war is far from over. Noah's expression warmed with something that looked remarkably like admiration. Mrs. Sullivan, I believe I've made a very fortunate match indeed. They continued their journey to Lancaster Purpose, replacing celebration as the focus of their wedding day. Yet as they rode side by side toward whatever challenges awaited, Sarah felt an unexpected sense of confidence. Together, they were stronger than either had been alone, exactly the partnership they had sought to create through their union. Harrington's schemes might delay their plans, but Sarah felt certain they wouldn't ultimately prevail. The bond forming between her and Noah, between their families and their lands, was already proving more resilient than their adversary had anticipated. Lancaster presented a stark contrast to the isolation of Whisper Creek Ranch. Though small by Eastern standards, the town bustled with Saturday activity farmers bringing produce to market shopkeepers, displaying their wares, families gathering for weekend socializing. As Noah and Sarah rode down the main street toward the county courthouse, curious glances followed them, whispers spreading at the sight of Whisper Creek's reclusive owner and his new bride. The courthouse stood at the center of town, a solid limestone building that had survived both the war and the occasional unrest that followed. Noah helped Sarah dismount, his hand lingering supportively at her waist for a moment before they climbed the worn steps together. Inside the county clerk, a thin, nervous man named Simmons looked up with evident discomfort as they entered his office. Mr. Sullivan, he greeted, avoiding direct eye contact. And, Mrs. Sullivan, I presume congratulations on your nuptials. Thank you, Noah replied evenly. We're here to file our marriage certificate. Simmons nodded, relief evident in his expression. That I can certainly help with. Reverend Johnson's signature is all in order. Noah produced the certificate, which the clerk examined briefly before stamping and entering into the county ledger. There, Simmons said, handing the document back. Officially recorded, Mr. and Mrs. Noah Sullivan. He hesitated, then added awkwardly, I understand Judge Pierce has issued an injunction regarding certain property documents. He has. Noah confirmed, his tone neutral, despite the anger Sarah knew he must still feel. On what legal basis, I'm curious to know. Simmons fidgeted with his spectacles. I couldn't say, Mr. Sullivan. The judge doesn't confide in me about such matters. But Harrington does, doesn't he? Noah pressed. He knew our plans, knew exactly when to intercept us with that injunction. Someone in Lancaster has been watching Whisper Creek and reporting back. The clerk's discomfort visibly increased. Mr. Sullivan, I really couldn't. It's all right, Mr. Simmons, Sarah interrupted gently, sensing the man's distress. We're not accusing you. We're simply trying to understand the situation so we can address it properly. Her approach seemed to ease the clerk's anxiety somewhat. Mrs. Sullivan, all I can tell you is that Judge Pierce received a sworn statement yesterday afternoon raising concerns about certain documents that might be presented for recording. As a matter of procedure, he issued the temporary injunction until those concerns can be addressed. And how long will that take? Noah asked. Simmons spread his hands apologetically. The judge's calendar is indeed quite full. Cases are being scheduled into next month at the earliest. Just as Harrington had planned, Sarah thought grimly. Long enough to proceed with the foreclosure on Whisper Creek and challenge her claim to Twin Oaks. Is there any way to expedite the review? She asked. These documents are crucial to resolving multiple property disputes. Simmons hesitated, glancing nervously toward the door as if expecting someone to enter. I shouldn't say this, but Judge Pierce is particularly responsive to certain influences. Mr. Harrington has been very generous to the judge's re-election campaign. The implication was clear. The judge's cooperation with Harrington's schemes was not coincidental, but purchased. Noah's expression darkened. I see. And is there anyone in Lancaster with comparable influence who might counter Harrington's? Simmons adjusted his spectacles again, a nervous habit that seemed to surface whenever the conversation turned uncomfortable. Mayor Caldwell has never been fond of Harrington's methods. They've clashed repeatedly over development plans for the county. He lowered his voice further. And the mayor's wife is a Martin cousin, if I recall correctly. Might have some personal interest in matters related to Twin Oaks. This unexpected information gave Sarah hope. A potential ally in Lancaster I, with both personal and political reasons to oppose Harrington, could prove invaluable. Thank you, Mr. Simmons, she said warmly. You've been most helpful. The clerk nodded, seeming relieved that the conversation was concluding. Congratulations again on your marriage. Despite these complications, I wish you both happiness. Outside the courthouse, Noah led Sarah to a small cafe on a side street secluded enough for private conversation. Over coffee and simple sandwiches, they discussed their next steps. Mayor Caldwell. Noah mused, his expression thoughtful. Thomas Caldwell. I've met him a few times at county functions. Straightforward man, from what I recall. Built a successful freight business before entering politics. And his wife is a Martin? Sarah asked, intrigued by this potential family connection. Noah nodded. Rebecca Martin Caldwell. I'd forgotten the relation, but yes, she would be your second cousin, perhaps Joseph Martin's brother's granddaughter, if I have the family tree right. A family connection I knew nothing about, Sarah said, shaking her head at the irony. All those years my mother spoke of being alone, cut off from her Texas relatives, and yet here's a cousin in Lancaster. The war divided many families, Noah reminded her gently. Rebecca's father fought for the Confederacy, your father for the Union. Such divisions weren't easily bridged, even among kin. Sarah sighed, acknowledging the truth in his words. Should we call on them today? Noah considered this, weighing their options. It would be unexpected arriving unannounced on our wedding day, but given Harrington's maneuvers, time is a luxury we don't have. He reached across the table to cover her hand with his. Are you up for it? It's been a long day already. The gesture, simple but supportive, warmed Sarah more than the coffee. I'm fine, she assured him. If these Caldwells might help us counter Harrington, we should see them immediately. The mayor's home stood on a hill overlooking Lancaster, a handsome two-story structure that spoke of prosperity without ostentation. As their horses approached, Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. What reception might they expect from these unknown relatives? Would her Martin connection be welcomed or viewed with suspicion, given her northern upbringing? A housekeeper answered their knock, her eyes widening slightly at Noah's introduction of himself and his bride. "One moment, please," she said, showing them to a comfortable parlor before disappearing to inform her employers of the unexpected visitors. Minutes later, a striking couple entered the room. Thomas Caldwell was a tall, barrel-chested man with a neatly trimmed beard showing the first hints of gray. His wife Rebecca was equally impressive, a handsome woman in her early 40s with the same dark hair and strong features Sarah had seen in the single photograph she possessed of her grandfather. "Sullivan," the mayor greeted, extending his hand. "This is unexpected, and I understand congratulations are in order." Noah shook the offered hand. "Thank you, Mayor Caldwell. Yes, Sarah and I were married this morning at Whisper Creek." Rebecca Caldwell's gaze had fixed on Sarah with evident curiosity. "Sarah, Thornton was it before today?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah confirmed. "My mother was Clara Martin, daughter of Joseph Martin of Twin Oaks." A flash of recognition crossed Rebecca's features. "Clara, the one who married the Northerner before the war." Her expression softened. "I never met her. I was just a child when she left Texas, but my father spoke of her sometimes. Said she had more spirit than all her cousins combined." The simple recollection of her mother from someone who had known of her even distantly brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. "She did have spirit," she agreed softly. "Until the end." Understanding crossed Rebecca's face. "She's passed. Then I'm sorry." "Both my parents died of fever 3 months ago," Sarah explained. "My brothers and I came to Texas seeking the only inheritance left to us, Twin Oaks Plantation." Mayor Caldwell's expression grew serious. "I've heard rumors about Twin Oaks recently. Harrington at the bank has been making noise about auctioning it for back taxes." "Harrington has been making more than noise," Noah said grimly. "He's actively working to prevent Sarah from claiming her rightful inheritance while simultaneously pushing forward with foreclosure on Whisper Creek." The mayor gestured for them to sit, his interest clearly piqued. "Perhaps you'd better start at the beginning." Over the next hour, Noah and Sarah explained the entire situation, their meeting on the trail, the discovery of the water disputes, Harrington's increasingly aggressive tactics, and finally, the marriage that had been both strategic alliance and personal choice. When they finished, Mayor Caldwell exchanged a significant look with his wife before addressing them. "Harrington's been a thorn in Lancaster's side for years," he said frankly. "Buying up distressed properties, manipulating water rights, using the bank to pressure vulnerable landowners. But he's careful, always operates just within the letter of the law, or at least ensures there's no proof when he steps outside it." "The fire at the creek," Noah pointed out. "The altered surveys, the convenient injunction perfectly timed to block our property filings." Caldwell nodded grimly. "His methods are clear enough to those who've dealt with him. Proving them is another matter entirely." "What about Judge Pierce?" Sarah asked. Mr. Simmons at the county office hinted that the judge might be influenced by Harrington. "Pierce is in Harrington's pocket," Rebecca confirmed bluntly. "Has been for years. Their review of your documents will take exactly as long as Harrington needs to complete his plans for foreclosure." The confirmation of their suspicions was disheartening, but Sarah refused to surrender to despair. "Then we need another approach. Is there any way to circumvent the judge appeal to a higher court, perhaps?" Mayor Caldwell stroked his beard thoughtfully. "The circuit judge won't be through Lancaster for another month. But He paused, an idea clearly forming. There might be another way. The county commissioners meet on Monday to review tax assessments. As mayor, I sit on that board. If we could prove that the back taxes Harrington claims on Twin Oaks were actually paid— They were, Sarah said quickly. My grandfather was meticulous about such matters, according to Ben Parker, who worked neighboring land. Ben Parker, Rebecca repeated, recognition dawning. Tall man formerly enslaved on the Jackson place, I remember him. My father always said if Ben Parker told you something, you could take it to the bank. That's Ben, Noah confirmed. He's my foreman now, has been for years. He claims to have seen the tax receipts himself before Joseph Martin died. Witness testimony, Caldwell mused, combined with your inheritance documents and the original property agreements between the Sullivan and Martin families, it might be enough to at least delay Harrington's plans while a more thorough investigation is conducted. Hope kindled in Sarah's chest. And the foreclosure on Whisper Creek. Caldwell's expression grew more serious. That's more difficult. The loans are legitimate, and the payment terms clear. Unless you can meet the obligations by the deadline, or prove that Harrington has engaged in illegal activities that have directly damaged Whisper Creek's ability to meet those obligations, Noah suggested, such as deliberately setting the fire that altered the creek flow. That would certainly change matters, Caldwell agreed. But again, proof is the challenge. Rebecca, who had been listening intently, suddenly straightened. Jake Monroe, she said, glancing at her husband. Wasn't he arrested last week for drunk and disorderly conduct? Still in the town jail, I believe. The mayor's eyes lit with understanding. Monroe's one of Harrington's occasional hired men, not the most savory character, and currently quite unhappy about being left to languish in a cell while Harrington has apparently refused to pay his bail. A disgruntled employee with potential knowledge of Harrington's illegal activities, Noah said, seeing the opportunity immediately. Someone who might be willing to talk given the right incentives, such as having his bail paid and charges reduced in exchange for testimony, Caldwell confirmed with a slight smile. I believe I could arrange a conversation with Sheriff Donovan about that possibility. For the first time since encountering Harrington on the road that morning, Sarah felt genuine optimism. They had potential allies in Lancaster, unexpected family connections, and the beginnings of a counter-strategy against Harrington's schemes. Thank you, she said sincerely to the Caldwells, for hearing us out, for believing us, for offering help. Rebecca rose and crossed to where Sarah sat, taking her hands warmly. Your family, my dear. Martins stick together, even those we've never met before. She smiled, studying Sarah's features. You have Clara's eyes, from what I've heard, and clearly her courage as well, making this journey to claim your inheritance. The simple acceptance, the acknowledgement of family ties that transcended the divisions of war and distance, moved Sarah deeply. After weeks of feeling like outsiders in Texas, she and her brothers had found not only a home at Whisper Creek, but also kin in Lancaster. As the afternoon lengthened into evening, the Caldwells insisted that Noah and Sarah stay for dinner, turning their unexpected visit into a small wedding celebration. Thomas opened a bottle of fine French wine preserved from before the war, and Rebecca produced a dessert of peach cobbler that reminded Sarah poignantly of her mother's recipe. To new beginnings, Mayor Caldwell toasted, raising his glass, and to the union of the Sullivan and Martin families long overdue. To family, Rebecca added with a warm smile for Sarah, both old and new. As they rode back to Whisper Creek in the gathering dusk, Sarah felt a profound sense of contentment despite the day's earlier setbacks. Their marriage certificate was legally filed. They had discovered unexpected allies in Lancaster, and a plan was forming to counter Harrington's machinations. Not quite the wedding day either of us imagined, Noah observed as they approached the ranch lights glowing welcomingly from the windows of what was now truly her home. Perhaps not, Sarah agreed, but meaningful in its own way. We've faced our first challenge together and found a path forward. Noah glanced at her, his expression softening in the twilight. You're remarkable, Sarah Sullivan. Most brides would be distraught at having their wedding day disrupted by legal maneuvers and emergency strategizing. I'm not most brides, she reminded him with a small smile. And you're not most grooms. We entered into this union with clear eyes, knowing the challenges we faced. They rode in companionable silence for a moment, before Noah spoke again, his voice quieter, more hesitant than she had heard before. I want you to know, he said, that regardless of how our marriage began as a strategic alliance, I intend to be a true husband to you, Sarah, in all ways when you're ready. The implication of his words sent warmth spreading through Sarah that had nothing to do with the summer evening. Their hasty marriage had left little time to consider the more intimate aspects of their new relationship. She began, then paused, gathering her thoughts. I appreciate your consideration, Noah, and I want you to know that I entered into this marriage fully aware of all it entails. When the time is right, I hope we'll build that aspect of our relationship as thoughtfully as we've approached everything else. Noah's smile, visible even in the fading light, warmed his usually serious features. A partnership in all things, he said softly. That's what I hope for us, Sarah. As do I, she replied, her heart full with the simple truth of it. As Whisper Creek Ranch came fully into view, Sarah could see the celebration was still underway. Lanterns hung from the trees, music drifted from the yard, where the hands had cleared space for dancing, and the sounds of laughter carried on the evening breeze. Martha stood on the porch, clearly watching for their return. As they dismounted, she hurried down the steps to meet them. You're back, she said, relief evident in her voice. When Lucas returned with news of Harrington's injunction, we feared you might be delayed in Lancaster. The mayor and his wife were most hospitable, Noah explained, helping Sarah down from her horse. We've made some promising connections that may help us counter Harrington's schemes. Martha nodded approvingly. Good. The men have been celebrating regardless of Harrington's interference. They see this marriage as a victory in itself. She turned to Sarah with unusual warmth. Welcome home, Mrs. Sullivan. Truly home now. The simple statement, delivered with such sincerity, brought a lump to Sarah's throat. After weeks of uncertainty, months of grueling travel, and the grief of losing her parents, she had found not just shelter, but belonging. As Noah led her toward the ongoing celebration, his hand warm and supportive at the small of her back, Sarah felt a sense of rightness that transcended the strategic aspects of their union. Whatever challenges Harrington might yet pose, whatever difficulties the drought and their financial situation presented, they would face them together as partners, as family, as husband and wife, in more than just name. The music grew louder as they approached the yard, where ranch hands had pushed back tables to create space for dancing. Daniel and James sat with Lucas, watching the festivities with bright eyes despite the late hour. Ben stood nearby, keeping a watchful eye on the boys while tapping his foot in time with the fiddle music. Ah, the bride and groom return, Ben called out, spotting them first. A cheer went up from the hands, many of whom had clearly enjoyed liberal portions of the whiskey Noah had provided for the occasion. One dance, Noah murmured close to Sarah's ear. For appearance's sake, at least. Sarah smiled up at him, suddenly shy, despite the practical nature of their arrangement. I'd like that. Noah led her into the cleared space, placing one hand properly at her waist, while taking her right hand in his left. The fiddler, one of the younger hands with surprising talent, struck up a waltz slower and more dignified than the lively reels that had preceded it. As they moved together beneath the lantern light, Sarah found herself studying her husband's face, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting against the Texas sun, the unexpected gentleness in his gray gaze as it met hers. "What are you thinking?" Noah asked softly, guiding her through a turn with unexpected grace for a man who spent his days on horseback. "That this is not at all where I expected to be when my brothers and I set out from Missouri," Sarah admitted. "Dancing at my own wedding with a former Confederate officer on a ranch that's become home in ways I never anticipated." Noah's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Regrets?" "No," Sarah answered honestly. "Surprise, perhaps. Wonder at how life can change so completely in such a short time. But not regret." Relief softened his expression. "Good, because despite Harrington's interference and all the challenges ahead, I find myself surprisingly content with how this day has unfolded." As the music drew to a close, Noah's hand at her waist drew her slightly closer, not inappropriately so, but enough to feel the solid strength of him, the security his presence offered. "Thank you, Sarah," he said quietly, "for taking a chance on Whisper Creek. On me." Before she could respond, he released her, stepping back to a proper distance as the gathered ranch hands applauded the conclusion of their dance. But something had shifted between them in that brief moment, an acknowledgement of the personal connection growing beneath the practical foundation of their marriage. The celebration continued around them, but Sarah found her attention repeatedly drawn to Noah as he moved among his men, accepting congratulations, sharing jokes, embodying the quiet leadership that had first earned her respect. This complex man was now her husband partner in the challenges ahead, protector of her brothers, and perhaps, in time, something even more significant in her heart. Whatever Harrington's schemes might bring, whatever obstacles the coming days might present, Sarah felt a deep certainty that they would face them together, not just as strategic allies, but as a true family forged through shared purpose and growing affection. As the Texas night deepened around Whisper Creek Ranch, stars blazing in the vast sky above, Sarah Sullivan found herself for the first time since her parents' deaths looking toward the future with genuine hope.